A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. I never thought I'd find myself in a position where I'd have to question whether or not I was the asshole for something so trivial, but here I was, staring at a pot of burnt spaghetti and 1,000 thoughts swirling in my head. That's how it always started, my wife Kelly's cooking adventures. The first time we had dinner together, she crafted this incredible dish that made my taste buds dance. I thought I'd struck gold. But as months turned into years, I came to realize that her culinary skill wasn't so much an adventure as it was an ongoing gamble. Sometimes we'd feast like kings, and other times, well, let's just say a pizza delivery was always a phone call away. It wasn't that she didn't try, she genuinely loved to cook. I admired her passion and enthusiasm, often overshadowing her misadventures in the kitchen with supportive cheers and lighthearted jokes. What I did not count on was how that playful joking would snap back one evening when frustration eclipsed my empathy. It was a Tuesday, the day she usually cooked, and, as fate would have it, she attempted a new recipe from a cooking show she'd binge-watched. I could hear the sizzle from the living room. Hours passed, the aroma was less vibrant than I remembered, and I felt a knot of instinctual dread. When she finally presented her new creation, my heart sank. It was, remarkably, a gloppy mass that resembled the aftermath of a science experiment gone wrong. I took a deep breath, knowing I should keep my mouth shut, but the words escaped before I could catch them. "Kelly, maybe you shouldn't cook." The moment they left my lips, I could feel the weight of what I'd said crashing down on us. The laughter I'd hoped for with my light teasing transformed into a crumbling silence. Hurt flickered across her face, and with it, the shift in the atmosphere left me breathless. I defended myself, trying to explain my feelings, but I could see my words peeling back layers of her self-esteem, and it was suffocating. We ended up eating leftovers, both of us too wrapped in our own thoughts to even playfully argue about whose turn it was to pick the takeout. I went to bed that night wrestling with a whirlwind of guilt, convinced I'd crossed a line. Was I just frustrated from a long day? Or was I genuinely an asshole for being so blunt? I kept replaying her expression, that flicker of disappointment that felt like a stab to my heart. I tried to talk to her the next day, but the energy had shifted. She was quieter, her laughter diminished. I missed the light-hearted banter that filled our home, the warm aroma of love that cooking together always brought. After a few days of silence and the awkwardness that lingered like a bad aftertaste, I finally sat her down and apologized. I told her how much I cherished her attempts and how it didn't matter if dinner wasn't perfect, it was the effort and love behind it that counted. We talked, really talked, unraveling the misgivings each of us felt. I wanted her to know I wasn't trying to attack her passion, I was just overwhelmed by the constant letdowns. After that frank conversation, we came to an understanding, a cooking schedule that would help her try simpler meals and, on days when she wanted to experiment, we'd do it together. I think that's what our relationship needed, real communication. I still remember her eyes brightening at the thought of cooking together, and even as we stumbled through the recipes, we made a hell of a mess that turned into so many laughs. And honestly, that's what I needed too. A reminder that it's not about the food. It's about the love served alongside it. In the end, I realized we were both learning in our own way, catering to each other's strengths, and I could only hope that she never stopped experimenting in the kitchen, no matter what. It's funny how a simple spatula can become a bridge in a relationship, transforming small arguments over burnt toast into laughter over spilled sauce. I hadn't expected our cooking sessions to turn into something special, but as we continued, they became a staple of our weekends. We'd put on music, her playlist with those catchy pop songs that made me think of summer even in the snowy months, and take our time chopping, boiling, and mixing ingredients as if we were crafting a masterpiece rather than just a dinner. I can still hear her singing off-key while I struggled with the knife skills I'd picked up from culinary shows. The first time we attempted a homemade pizza, I thought it was going to end in disaster, given how she had no idea that dough needs to breathe. But the mishaps turned into moments we'd cherish forever, like when the cheese overflowed and we both just stood there, giggling amidst the chaotic kitchen. I began to appreciate that cooking was more than just a task, it was a canvas for our creativity and a testament to our partnership. We'd watch videos on new techniques, eager to impress each other. Sometimes, when it didn't go quite as planned, like that time the chicken ended up tasting like a rubber ball, we would just order takeout and sink into the couch to binge-watch something stupid. It wasn't about perfection, and I think that realization was the turning point for both of us. I could see her confidence growing, not just with the meals but in herself, which lit a fire in me to be more encouraging, to let her know it's perfectly okay to mess up. On one particularly snowy afternoon, we decided to tackle a new recipe, a beef stew that required hours of patience, simmering on the stove while the aroma danced around us. As the rich scent filled the house, she looked at me with a gleam in her eye and said, "This feels real, doesn't it? Like home." And in that moment, it hit me, this was our home. It wasn't just the walls or the furniture, it was in these shared experiences, in the laughter, in the mess, that made all the difference. We spent that evening curled up on the couch, bowls in hand, talking about our dreams and plans, while flurries tapped lightly at the windows. It made me reflect on how easy it had been to focus on the negatives, to get caught in a spiral of frustration rather than celebrating what we had. The evolution of our cooking sessions mirrored that change. Together, we'd stirred up much more than just ingredients, we'd cooked up understanding, patience, and a renewed sense of teamwork. I know there will always be days ahead where everything won't taste like a Michelin star meal, but I've learned it doesn't need to. In those moments, I realized that we could laugh at ourselves, pull together as a team, and enjoy whatever the outcome. Looking back now, I can't help but smile at how far we've come. In the early days, I worried that I hadn't handled things well, that my words had been too harsh or damaging. But those days full of flour and spills have shifted the narrative between us. Together, we discovered the joy of cooking wasn't in the final dish but in sharing the mess, and somewhere between those meals, we found a renewed sense of love for each other, simmering just right. And I really, truly hope we never stop serving each other in the kitchen or beyond. It's funny how life can dish out unexpected lessons in the most mundane settings. Just the other night, after an exceptionally busy day, I found myself curled up on the couch, savoring that sense of contentment that follows a full, laughter-filled day. The kitchen was alive with the warm glow of the evening sun filtering through the curtains, and the scent of garlic, the unmistakable aroma of a concoction my wife had put together on her own. It struck me that a few months ago, I would have been feeling the gnaw of anxiety as I anticipated another meal that might miss the mark. Now, however, I found myself leaning back, letting the scents wash over me, a soft smile creeping onto my face. I marveled at how far we'd come and how, in many ways, we were still finding ourselves and each other amidst the chaos of life. That evening, I got up to help her, making my way into the kitchen, and as soon as I entered, she turned to me with a smirk. "You ready to test your sous chef skills?" she teased, a sparkle in her eye. I chuckled, wrapping my arms around her waist, pulling her close for a brief moment. "Only if you promise to save some for me this time," I said, recalling one of our earliest experiments where I'd gotten so involved in chopping vegetables that I inadvertently turned our dinner into an impromptu taste tasting, grabbing for each bite like a ravenous beast. She laughed, recalling our culinary disasters with an affection that painted over the stresses of those earlier days. We chopped and stirred, shared playful banter, and I could see her confidence grow with every dish. Each splatter of sauce felt like a brushstroke on the canvas of our relationship, transforming a bland palate into something vibrant. As she stirred the pot, I noticed the little things, the way she bit her lip when she was focused, the gentle hum she made when she was happy. It was all part of the woman I fell in love with, and I realized that those delightful quirks brought more to our time together than any perfect meal ever could. We talked about our week, shared our worries, and I felt like each shared ingredient was a piece of ourselves being mixed together, creating something unique and beautiful. I appreciated how our partnership had deepened, not just in the kitchen but across every part of our lives. We were learning to communicate better, understanding the importance of patience and support, even outside the realm of recipes. When dinner was finally served, I couldn't help but grin at the sight before us, a colorful array of far-from-restaurant quality dishes spread across the table and absolutely bursting with love. We gawked at them for a moment, both of us silently agreeing that it was more about the laughter than how many Michelin stars we could earn. As we sat down, I held her hand across the table, feeling a swell of gratitude that she had taken a chance on me, that we hadn't just settled into patterns of complaints, but had chosen instead to laugh and learn. Each bite, while it may have been imperfect, was accompanied by our shared stories, playful digs about culinary schools never calling us back, and the realization that, really, any meal we enjoyed together was bound to be spectacular. Looking back, the moment I made my poorly chosen remark about her cooking, I had no idea our journey would wind into such beautiful chaos. It was as if we had both stepped into a poorly lit kitchen, only to find that together we could brighten the entire room with laughter and understanding. While I still joke that her cooking isn't always perfect, I've learned to appreciate the joy each dish brings. And like the best meals, I hope we continue to spice things up, learning from each other along the way and warming our hearts over whatever we decide to throw into our pots next. I used to believe that family gatherings were supposed to be filled with laughter and joy, Yet somehow, our last holiday dinner descended into chaos. Let me set the scene. It was Thanksgiving, and I was in charge of dessert, my mother's famous chocolate chip cookies being the star of the show. They were known far and wide among the family as the best cookies you could ever get your hands on, golden brown, gooey chocolate bits, and a hint of vanilla that danced on your palate like a warm hug. My brother-in-law, Keith, had always been a little difficult, often bringing an air of annoyance when he was around, but this year was different. He showed up late, barely acknowledged anyone, and then proceeded to complain about everything, how the turkey was dry, how nobody ever made the side dishes he liked, and the weather being freezing. I tried to shake off the irritation and focus on the food, but with each comment, my blood started to simmer a little more. When it finally came time for dessert, I served up the cookies, my heart racing as I encouraged everyone to dig in. But, of course, Keith couldn't help himself. He picked one up, looked at it with disdain, and said, "Of course, you made your mom's cookies again. Can't you ever try anything new?" My heart sank. I felt the anger rise within me, but I took a deep breath. Instead of reacting, I smiled tightly and offered him a cookie. This only seemed to amuse him. "You're really giving me a cookie? I'd expect nothing less from you. Guess you don't know how to handle criticism." His laughter rang out, a harsh note in the otherwise merry atmosphere. The hubbub of family chatter quieted for a moment, and I could feel all eyes on us. I held my ground, a mixture of disbelief and outrage bubbling beneath the surface. "Yeah, Keith, but at least I know how to bake," I shot back, half joking, half hurt. The family chuckled nervously, unsure whether to side with me or with their amusingly cynical cousin-in-law. As I stood there, cookie in hand, I felt this strange urge to actually give him what he wanted. I walked over to him, handed him the cookie with a challenging smile, and said, "Here, have a cookie, and maybe it'll sweeten your mood." To my surprise, he grabbed it, still smirking, and took a big bite. In that moment, I felt the tension shift, although I wasn't quite sure how. I'd fueled his rudeness, sure, but maybe I'd also diffused it just a little. The night went on, laughter returning, but my heart still felt bruised. I couldn't shake off the question, did I let him get away with his bad behavior, or did I actually stand up for myself? The next day, I found myself checking on a Reddit community, unsure of how to process my feelings. AITA for giving my Bill his favorite cookie when he was being rude? I typed into the post, desperate for validation, or at least some perspective. The comments flooded in, with people defending me and others pointing fingers at my choice of dessert diplomacy. It seemed I had become somewhat of an unwilling instigator in our family drama. As I read through the responses, I realized that navigating family dynamics is akin to walking a tightrope. You either fall flat or somehow manage to find your balance, and perhaps in that chaotic moment, I had done both. It wasn't just about the cookies, it was about setting boundaries, about standing my ground while still trying to maintain a sense of family cohesion. In the end, maybe I had learned that sometimes sweetness is a necessary ingredient, even when mixed with a little bitterness. As I settled back into my chair, the afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen window, I found myself reflecting on the tiny whirlwind that had spun out of a simple cookie. It had all started innocently enough. My brother-in-law, Eric, was visiting with my sister, and I had baked his favorite chocolate chip cookies as a welcome gesture. Everyone was buzzing with laughter and chatter when Eric walked in, eyes lighting up at the sight of the cookie platter like a kid in a candy store. But the atmosphere shifted almost instantly when he made a snide comment about my choice of music playing softly in the background, mocking it as old people stuff. The laughter died, hovering awkwardly in the air, and I could feel the unspoken tension brewing around the room, a recipe for disaster. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to brush it off and carry on with the festivities, but another part of me felt stung, like a nagging bee buzzing in my ear that I couldn't swat away. As the minutes passed, more jabs followed, with Eric sarcastically commenting on everything from the decorations to the fact that I'd made too many cookies. Meanwhile, my sister wore a tight-lipped smile, clearly torn between her brother and her loyalty to me. I felt myself boiling under the surface, wanting to shout back, to remind him that we weren't in high school anymore, but I held my tongue, choosing instead to act with what I hoped was grace. Finally, with a heavy heart and a sigh, I picked up a cookie, carefully placed it on a napkin, and walked over to where Eric sat, acting as if I were making a friendly gesture. "Hey, Eric," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside, "I thought you might like one of these. The extra chocolate chips might make it sweeter than your comments today." I handed him the cookie, watching his surprise morph into a frown. His eyes narrowed for a second, and I could almost see the gears turning in his head. Was he going to take the bait or rise above it? To my astonishment, he took the cookie with a mixture of annoyance and confusion, a silent acknowledgement of the jab but also an acceptance of the olive branch. I watched as he took a hesitant bite, and for a fleeting moment, our eyes locked, and I wondered if this was the beginning of a truce or merely a temporary ceasefire. The room felt heavy but oddly charged. What I'd expected to be a cookie throwdown turned into some strange form of diplomacy that none of us had anticipated, as laughter crept back into the air, albeit a bit quieter, and conversation resumed. Yet that moment of shared, albeit tense, sweetness lingered between us. I started to realize that maybe, just maybe, my act of defiance combined with kindness had opened a door for communication, creating a space to address the larger issues lurking beneath the surface of our family gatherings. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table, the cookie platter almost empty, a culinary victory mixed with emotional exhaustion. Over the next few days, I shared the story with close friends, weaving the threads of our tangled family fabric into a narrative that resonated with them. Some saw me as courageous, while others deemed the act a silly misstep. I began to ponder the consequences of my actions. Did I empower Eric to be even ruder, or had I planted a seed for change? It sparked a conversation between my sister and me later when I told her how I felt about Eric's behavior. Her refreshingly candid response helped clear some of the air between us. She recognized his sarcasm was a cover for his own insecurities. Perhaps we were all just trying to cope with familial pressures in our ways, finding humor where we could, even if it meant hurling cookies into verbal sparring matches. Now, weeks later, the sun still pours in through the kitchen window, and every time I bake those cookies, I can't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. The cookies became a symbol of a balance I was learning to create, a reminder that sometimes, a lighthearted jab mixed with sweetness can lead to deeper conversations that needed addressing. Eric still has his moments of arrogance, but every once in a while, he'll comment about the cookies with a hint of respect in his tone, and that's enough for me. It feels like we're navigating towards some sort of truce, where laughter and playful jabs can coexist without becoming a battlefield. Each cookie baked now carries the weight of that experience, a reminder that within family, love is often wrapped in layers of confusion, but a sprinkle of sweetness can break through the hard shell. It was one of those crisp autumn afternoons when I found myself scrolling through my phone, the sun filtering through the golden leaves and casting a warm glow across my kitchen. I had just baked a fresh batch of my famous chocolate chip cookies, the smell wafting through the house like a cozy blanket. It was peaceful, but I couldn't shake the lingering thoughts of Eric and our previous exchanges. The echo of his rude comments played in my mind, often mixed with his surprising candor since our cookie incident, which left me perplexed but hopeful. As I arranged those golden brown treats on the cooling rack, a sense of nostalgia washed over me. Eric and I had grown up laughing and fighting like siblings do, and my cookies had always been a point of pride for me in the family, something I could offer freely to both quell tensions and nurture connections. I remember my grandmother baking for us, how her treats were a salve to any quarrel, and it struck me then in that serene moment that perhaps I had inherited more than just her recipes. I had inherited a legacy of connection and communication, albeit a messy one through family feuds and the occasional burning oven mishap. Later that evening, after a long day, I found myself sitting on the back porch with my husband, Jake, discussing dinner plans when the distant sound of laughter caught my attention. It was Eric outside, tossing a football with my kids, the playful shouts blending with the soft rustling of leaves. A smile crept onto my face. There was something truly comforting about watching them, this chaotic ballet of family life unfolding in the fading light. And then, on a bit of a whim, I pulled out a plate of cookies and made my way to the yard, the soft crunch of fallen leaves beneath my feet. As I approached, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. Had that moment of tension with Eric really changed anything? I set the plate down on the picnic table, and as if sensing my uncertainty, Jake leaned in and whispered, "You've got this," sending a tiny spark of confidence rippling through me. "Hey, fellas. Who wants cookies?" I called, trying to keep my tone light. Eric glanced over, his expression shifting from playful to curious, and for a moment, I wondered if I imagined the slight flicker of tension in his brow. "Those look amazing," he said, moving towards the cookies with genuine enthusiasm. "Thanks. They're basically a family tradition now, aren't they?" I quipped, watching for his reaction. The kids rushed in before he could respond, their small hands reaching for the biggest cookies, and a fractional relief washed over me. But then Eric caught my eye, and the playful respect I had been longing for flickered there as he took a cookie and laid a teasing jab in my direction. "Just don't burn them, all right?" he said with a half smile. I was taken off guard but decided to take it in stride. Only if you promise to stop pretending you're better than everyone else in the kitchen, I shot back playfully, trying to mirror his tone. For a moment, silence hung heavy, and I braced myself for the fallout, the jovial sounds of my kids momentarily fading into the background. But then, to my amazement, Eric laughed, throwing his head back as if he'd just heard the world's best joke. Fine, truce. For the cookies, I'll keep my arrogance in check, he replied, breaking into a grin. That exchange ignited something between us. The laughter seemed to bridge an unspoken divide, and I felt a weight lift. The moment was fleeting, but I knew in a way that I didn't fully understand yet, it was significant. As the evening grew darker, we sat outside. The kids played around us while we shared stories, our banter on the edge of sibling rivalry. I could see Eric relax, watch him drop the bravado just enough to be both earnest and playful. It felt as if every cookie was both a peace offering and a cornerstone, in a way I hadn't expected. And as I watched my family together, laughter mingling with words and playful jabs, something inside me settled. Maybe the path to understanding isn't straight, it's messy and wild, filled with cookies, black and white sibling disputes, and moments of clarity. I looked over at Eric, who from that moment on felt less like an opponent and more like family, in all its bittersweet chaos. It occurred to me then that sometimes a simple cookie really can change everything. I never imagined I would find myself grappling with a question as sensitive as whether it was time to kick my daughter out, especially when that question came tumbling out of my mother's mouth one rainy Sunday afternoon. It was a lazy day in early fall, the leaves had just started to turn, and we sat cozied up in my kitchen over mugs of chamomile tea that neither of us would touch. The silence was heavy, like the clouds outside, and I remember staring down into my half-empty cup, willing myself to come up with something to say. My daughter, Sophie, was curled up on the couch with a book, blissfully unaware of the circus I felt unfolding through our kitchen table. She's 22 now, working part-time while finishing her last year of college, which is what might have fed my mom's concern that Sophie was still living at home. Yet, to me, it felt rational. I wanted to support Sophie, especially after the turbulent years we'd both navigated. Her father walked out when she was a child, and raising her alone had made our bond tighter. I remember my mom leaning back, her perfectly coiffed hair gleaming even in the shadowy kitchen light, and she said it casually, like we were discussing the weather or her latest gardening exploits. When are you finally going to kick her out? She needs to learn responsibility. Just like that, my calm facade shattered. I snapped, an instinctive reaction that surprised even me. Mom, she isn't just some inconvenience. You have no idea what we've been through. My voice cracked, the tension in my chest coiling tighter, and I felt shame ripple through me even as the words escaped. I saw her eyes widen, and for a moment, we were both quiet, the air thick with unspoken words. Regret washed over me immediately, but it was too late, the damage lingered in the small distance between us. For days afterward, I replayed that moment in my head, a loop of my harsh tone echoing in the hallways of my mind, and I couldn't shake the guilt that settled uncomfortably in my gut. I kept reminding myself that my mother had concerns, possibly shaped by her own rigid upbringing and traditional values, but it didn't make her comments sting any less. I wondered if I was doing the right thing, coddling Sophie instead of pushing her out into a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. The days turned into weeks, and I still found myself nervously checking in with Sophie more than ever, asking if she was happy and if she felt ready to face the world on her own. Her eyes, always so bright, now carried a hint of responsivity that made my heart ache. Mom, I appreciate everything, she'd said one evening, her voice steady. But I don't feel ready yet. In that moment, I recognized a fear reflected back at me, a fear I felt myself creeping up on me every time I looked at my child. So, we settled into this uneasy truce, a space where I could honor her own timeline while reckoning with my need to protect her. I could hear my mother's voice spiraling into my mind, faint but constant, she has to learn. Yet I thought of my daughter's fragile light and wondered if, perhaps, learning didn't always mean being pushed. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew this: love is not just about preparing someone to leave, sometimes it's about promoting their growth at their own pace. And as the autumn breeze drifted through the open window, carrying away the remnants of summer, I felt a whisper of hope that by holding space for Sophie, I was doing just that. I don't know if my mother will ever fully understand my choice, but I'm coming to terms with the idea that my love for my daughter doesn't fit into anyone else's prescribed timeline. Someday I'll have to navigate that conversation with her, but for now, I'm content in that microcosm of our little family, learning together. The sunlight began to fade, casting long shadows across the living room, and I found myself curled up on the couch with a half-read novel, the pages dog-eared and filled with notes. Outside, leaves crunched beneath the feet of passing neighbors, their laughter a gentle reminder that life continues to move forward, whether we're ready or not. I glanced at the clock and sighed, thinking about how every tick echoed my mother's words from the earlier conversation, poking at my mind like an annoying itch I couldn't scratch. When are you finally going to kick her out? Each time I replayed it, the irritation bubbled inside me anew. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate my mother's concern, she had always been practical, a voice of reason in our sometimes chaotic lives. But this was my child we were discussing, not a pet that needed housebreaking. Sophie had always been sensitive, more like me than I cared to admit, and after everything she went through, I simply couldn't bring myself to push her out into a world I had long learned could be cruel. Sure, she was 23, and yes, she'd taken a detour through college that seemed to last an eternity as she battled anxiety and depression. Watching her navigate life felt like standing on a fault line, waiting for an earthquake to swallow us both. I poured myself a cup of tea, the warmth of the mug grounding me as if it could somehow seep into the anxious pins and needles crawling beneath my skin. I couldn't shake the worry that my mother's perspective simmered beneath the surface like a threatening storm. What did she know of parenting a child with a mental health struggle? What right did she have to judge my choices when she'd hardly touched on the tempest that Sophie faced daily? I ran my fingers along the rim of the mug, thinking of the last time we had sat down together, just Sophie and me. It was a rainy afternoon, and we'd built a makeshift blanket fort in the living room, a womb of comfort in which we could finally have honest conversations, the kind that felt like whispers of the heart. I remembered how she had confided in me about her fears, her worries about finding a job, and the very real dread that she may never feel normal. The way she crinkled her nose and looked down, barely meeting my gaze, stabbed at me. I wanted so badly to tell her everything would be all right, that she would find her way, but all I could do was hold her, cocooning her in my embrace and promising to be there for as long as she needed. As I set my cup down on the table, the clinking sound echoed in the stillness, and I closed my eyes, imagining Sophie's laughter, her lopsided grin when something amused her. It was in those moments of lightness that I saw brilliance. She was creative, frightfully intelligent, and so sensitive to the nuances of life that it broke my heart every time she struggled. Who was I to impose my timeline on her? I had my own life, filled with failures and achievements alike, but those were mine, and they did not govern hers. Just as I was learning to breathe with the weight of my choices, perhaps she was carving her own path and simply needed the time to do so. And yet, the conflict festered. I thought of my conversations with friends who had children living on their own, working jobs, exploring relationships. They spoke of independence like it was a rite of passage, and sometimes I felt that familiar pang of doubt, like I was somehow failing Sophie by allowing her to stay. Their remarks, meant to uplift, often made me question my own approach. Maybe I should insist she look for jobs more seriously. Maybe I need to stop enabling her. But then I heard the sighs of exhaustion within my daughter's laughter, the cautious optimism she wore like a threadbare coat, and I couldn't shake the feeling that giving her a little more time might just be the nurturing she needed to eventually blossom. Later that evening, as a cool breeze swept through the window, I decided it was time to talk to Sophie. I found her in her room, the door slightly ajar as she hunched over her sketchbook, pencil in hand. Ignoring the instinct to tiptoe in, I knocked softly. "Hey, can we chat for a minute?" She looked up, her brown eyes widening before she nodded, setting the pencil down as she shifted on the bed, an invitation wrapped in her silence. I perched on the edge, nerves fluttering in the pit of my stomach. "I know things have felt heavy lately," I started, her gaze locked onto me, searching for reassurance. "And I want you to know it's okay to feel how you're feeling. You're allowed to take your time." I watched her expression soften, the tension in her shoulders easing as I spoke. "Your grandmother, well, she doesn't quite get it," I said with a light chuckle, and she began to smile, her laughter a balm to my worries. "But I'm not in a rush. You're not less of a person because you're figuring things out differently than others. We'll figure this out together, okay?" As she nodded, a semblance of relief washed over both of us. It felt like we had created an unspoken pact, one that said growth didn't need a deadline. I left her room feeling more at peace, allowing myself to embrace the uncertainty. As the last light of day dipped below the horizon, I realized that the journey we were on wouldn't always be easy, but we would face it side by side. Maybe in time, I'd find the words to share with my mother, maybe she would one day understand that love doesn't conform to schedules. But tonight, I was grateful just to sit with my daughter, letting the calm that settled in our little home wrap around us like a warm blanket as we navigated this unique dance together. As I settled into that familiar rhythm, the evening light fading into twilight, I could hear the gentle rustle of leaves just outside, the sound mingling with the soft notes of the piano as Sophie practiced in her room. The music floated through the hallway, a series of tentative chords punctuated by the occasional error, but there was a beauty in her struggle. She was finding her voice, even if it wasn't perfect yet, and that's all I could ever really ask for. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly dinner time, but I wasn't in a rush. Instead, I found myself feeling grateful for the stillness around us, the kind that only comes from being fully present in the moment. But then, like a sudden storm cloud on an otherwise calm day, I felt my phone buzz against the table, jolting me back to the reality of my life outside this cocoon. It was a message from Mom, a simple text that read, "When are you finally going to help her on her way?" My heart sank, and though I knew I should have been prepared for it, I felt the familiar prick of anger lodge deep within my chest. This wasn't the first time she'd broached the subject, and I could almost hear her voice laced with that familiar undertone of urgency, the kind that suggested a timeline I simply did not subscribe to. I took a deep breath, trying to parse through my emotions. The tension knotted up inside me. What was it about our relationship that continuously made love feel so conditional? Was my mother really so blind to Sophie's journey, or was she just projecting her own insecurities onto me? The clash of perspective felt unbearable at that moment. I wanted to respond, to unleash the frustration that bubbled up, but I also wanted to protect Sophie from the weight of our family dynamic spilling into what was otherwise a peaceful evening. Struggling to focus, I found my thoughts drifting back to the meals we'd shared, the laughter that sometimes danced in the air, but I still felt torn. With a small sigh, I placed my phone down without typing a reply. As if sensing my upheaval, Sophie peeked her head out of her room, her curious eyes searching for clarity. "Mom? Are you okay?" she asked, her voice cutting through my haze. I forced a smile, one that I hoped didn't betray the turmoil within. "Just a little message from Grandma," I replied, hoping to deflect. "Nothing to worry about." She nodded, but I could still see the flicker of concern in her eyes. That was the thing about Sophie, she always saw me, often better than I saw myself, and I realized I needed to be more intentional about how I engaged with my family, how I stood up for us both without spilling the dirt and leaving a mess. "Hey, want to try a duet? I bet I can play the melody while you tackle the piano part," I suggested, eager for a distraction. Her face lit up visibly, and just like that, everything fell into place again, the music rising to fill the air, soft yet unyielding. That one simple moment reminded me we were in this together, that our journey, while disjointed, was ours. The shadows of my mother's expectations lingered, but for the rest of the evening, they faded against the backdrop of our laughter and shared melodies. I wrapped my arms around Sophie as she played, letting the warmth of our bond seep deep, and beneath the surface, I held onto the narrative that was continually being rewritten, a story not dictated by others but one woven in love, patience, and time. As the last notes dripped into silence, I knew I still had a conversation ahead, but now there was a steadiness in my heart. Maybe I'd write a letter to my mother, pour out my feelings in words. Maybe, just maybe, she would understand that some journeys unfold in their own, beautifully chaotic way. But until then, I would lean into this moment. We were building a sanctuary, brick by gentle brick. I remember the night my partner, Alex, casually dropped a bombshell on me over dinner. We were sitting at our little wooden table, the kind that wobbles unless you balance it just right with a stack of magazines. The room was filled with the rich scent of garlic and rosemary. I just whipped up a hearty risotto, something I often made because cooking grounded me, gave me joy. In between bites, Alex looked at me with that look, intense and a bit nervous. "So, I was thinking, how about we get you a new kitchen setup? Like, a really fancy one. Maybe even a new stove?" My heart sank a bit. "Thanks, but I love my current setup," I replied, trying not to sound dismissive. Alex's face fell. "But I looked at induction cooktops, and this one has all these features that could really enhance your cooking." They launched into a whole spiel about the latest technology, how it could change the game for me. But what Alex didn't get was that I didn't want a shiny, expensive appliance that would take away the imperfect charm of my cooking space. I'd spent years cultivating my skills in that kitchen, and it represented more than just cookware, it was a haven. The thought of taking a gift worth over $1,000 felt like I was admitting my love for cooking wasn't genuine unless it came with a hefty price tag. "It's too much, Alex. Honestly, it feels ungrateful to accept that." I like cooking as it is. I don't need a fancy setup to validate me. The silence that hung between us thickened with tension, and I could see the disappointment in their eyes. My words landed hard. I felt bad for not embracing the gift, for not wanting to let a beautiful gesture in. But part of me felt like accepting it would twist the very essence of why I loved cooking. Over the next few days, I reflected on our conversation and weighed my feelings. I knew I had to talk to Alex again. Perhaps it would have made sense if I had explained to them how I derived my motivation from the little experiences, the imperfect meals I'd crafted, the burnt garlic that reminded me of my childhood mistakes. But instead, I let fear over the value of the gift consume me, and I left it untouched on the back burner, simmering in the awkwardness. I finally sat down with Alex again, who seemed torn. They were trying to understand my reasoning while also feeling hurt by my refusal. It was tense, like standing on fragile ice, unsure of where to step next. Look, I appreciate you wanting to support my passion, but I don't want that to be tied to money. Cooking is my artistry, my therapy. Making something from scratch is worth more than any gadget. As I spoke, I felt my heart race. I could see the wheels turning in Alex's mind, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't just quelling a conflict, I was shedding light on what truly mattered to both of us. We began to discuss the deeper layers of creativity and passion in our lives, how they manifest differently in both of us. I saw Alex's expression soften, and I caught the corners of their mouth lifting ever so slightly. While we may have had different views on value and love, I knew we cared deeply for one another, and that was a gift far more precious than any appliance could ever be. I can't say it all wrapped up neatly. There's still some lingering tension around the topic, but for now, we're finding our rhythm again, and that feels like progress. Sometimes, the way you show love and the way it's received can be as complicated as any recipe. And maybe that's okay. As I settled into my chair at the kitchen table, surrounded by scents of rosemary and garlic from the roast I had left to marinate, I reflected on the strange tension that had emerged between Alex and me. Just the other day, I had found myself engrossed in my latest culinary adventure, chopping vegetables with a fierce determination, but the whole time, a cloud of unease loomed over my head. Here was my beloved partner, an amazing cook in their own right, wanting to express their love through the gift of a state-of-the-art mixer, and yet I found myself feeling boxed in rather than uplifted. "You don't trust me to create," I had said that afternoon, the words spilling out before I could catch them. I could almost see the confusion glaze over Alex's face. "It's not that at all," they replied softly, and I felt the truth in their voice, but the initial sting of their well-intentioned gift stuck with me like burnt sugar. I loved cooking, so much that I thrived on the messiness and improvisation it brought into my life. To me, cooking wasn't just about whipping up something delicious, it was a dance, an expression of my personality, and a way to weave my love for those I cared about into something tangible. But accepting the glimmering appliance felt like accepting that I couldn't do it in my own way anymore. Now, as I swept my eyes around our modest kitchen, I realized that all those mismatched utensils and pots, the faint scars on the wooden cutting board, each a small testimony to some culinary experimentation gone wrong, were more valuable to me than any countertop marvel. The lingering tension with Alex persisted in the most unexpected ways. It surfaced during our shared moments, like when I tried to chop herbs as we talked about our week. "You know, that mixer could save you time," Alex quipped, the light tone of their voice masking the seriousness I was sensing behind it. I paused, knife hovering mid-air, and turned my gaze to their face, looking for the irritation I half expected to see. Instead, they wore a soft smile, and a hint of vulnerability crept into their eyes that made my heart ache. There was love in that smile, maybe even a quiet plea for understanding. For a moment, I felt as if I stood in front of a fire that could either warm my heart or burn me entirely. I inhaled slowly, letting the fragrant air fill my lungs, and I finally asked, "But do you get it? It's not about the time, I don't need time saved. I need to feel the process, the rawness of it." And in that moment, something shifted. Alex leaned forward, resting their arms on the table, brow furrowing as they considered my words. "I think I get it," they said gently, searching for the right way to phrase what I had just shared. "Then, how do I show you love if what I thought was helpful isn't? What can I do?" I had never thought of that before. How could I guide them when I barely understood myself? It was the questions that hung heavy in the air, shaping not just that moment, but the very fabric of our relationship. And while I didn't know that we would ever completely eliminate the misunderstandings that had taken root in our exchanges, I did feel a small flicker of hope. Perhaps love was less about grand gestures and more about the small conversations, the understanding that these little bumps weren't the end of the road, It was merely another twist in our ever-evolving recipe. After we finished cooking together, despite it taking longer than usual, we sat down to feast on my latest creation, and the tension began to ease. The flavors of what I made harmonized with quiet laughter as we reminisced about the silly moments we had shared along this journey. And just like that, our relationship began to simmer back to life, no grand mixer necessary. Later that night, as I washed the dishes, I found myself smiling at the reflective gleam of the stainless steel mixer on the counter, knowing it might eventually make its way into our kitchen, albeit on our terms. I realized that maybe it represented more than just a gadget. It was an opportunity for Alex to find creative freedom in their cooking, a chance for us to bond over something different. Perhaps love didn't always mean complete agreement, but rather embracing our differences and weaving them into something new. I turned to Alex, who was lounging on the couch, and just like that, I felt the warmth return to the space between us. Let's figure out ways we can cook together. I want our kitchen to feel like a partnership, I suggested. The corners of their mouth lifted into that familiar soft smile once again, and this time my heart felt lighter. I realized that maybe we didn't need to have all the answers, but we were on a journey together, and that was enough for now. The next few weeks unfolded like a delicate soufflé, full of promise but requiring patience and finesse. We started small, diving into recipes that felt attainable but had just enough challenge to keep us engaged. Saturday evenings became our little ritual. We'd pull out step-by-step cookbooks, the kind that have more pictures than words. I relished the moments when I would show Alex my favorite method of chopping an onion, explaining how to get the perfect dice while trying to refrain from getting too lost in a teaching mode. Alex, in turn, introduced me to their favorite marinades, sweet and tangy concoctions that I had never considered before. It was like we were two artists experimenting with fresh colors on a canvas, each stroke adding new texture to our relationship. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. I'd catch myself slipping into my old habits, where pride reared its head and I'd insist on doing everything myself, convinced that asking for help made me weak. One night, while stirring a bubbling marinara sauce, I felt the pull in my stomach, an urge to handle everything from prep to cleanup just to prove my prowess. Alex leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching me with those knowing eyes. It doesn't have to be perfect, you know. It should just be fun, they said gently, and I felt a flush of defensiveness rise within me. Yet, just like with any dish that requires adjusting ingredients based on taste, I took a breath and swallowed my pride. You're right, I admitted, setting the wooden spoon down. Can you help me chop some garlic? The light chuckle that escaped their lips was like music to my ears, dispelling the tension in the air. Together, we found a rhythm, hands moving in tandem, and I began to understand that making a meal wasn't solely about the end result, but rather the joy of the moment spent creating something together. As the aroma of our cooking filled the apartment, I noticed how laughter became a constant ingredient in our culinary experiment. We had our mishaps, a splatter of tomato sauce here, an overcooked piece of chicken there, but each blunder became a shared joke, a story to retell. One night, while we were wrestling with a particularly ambitious homemade pizza, it dawned on me how much closer we had grown through these shared experiences. With every flourish of fresh basil and sprinkle of cheese, our kitchen echoed with the laughter and chatter of two people who were no longer simply living under one roof but were beginning to build something warm together. Days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely, the kitchen transformed. It began holding memories, not just for Alex and me, but as a testament to our evolving partnership. And though I still had moments where I felt trepidation about expressing my thoughts, I learned it was okay to be vulnerable. One evening, as we sipped wine after another cooking session, I turned to Alex and shared my fears about not being enough. What if I'm just not good at this? I whispered, voice barely above a murmur. Alex paused, their gaze steady and unwavering. Don't you see? You're more than the perfect recipe. You bring so much heart to what we do. We'll figure this out, together. That night, I curled up next to Alex on the couch, wrapped in the warmth of our connection, and, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was breathing easier. The lingering tension didn't vanish completely, it lurked like a shadow, a reminder of how different our perspectives could be. Still, we were learning how to appreciate those differences without letting them create distance. As I knocked my head back and laughed at some foolish joke we shared, it hit me, this wasn't merely about cooking or gifts but rather the exploration of what it really meant to love someone and accept their love in return. In those late-night talks after dinner, we began weaving dreams together, sharing thoughts of a small garden outside, bursting with fresh herbs to elevate our meals. I think, perhaps, we were planting the seeds of not just a garden but a life we both envisioned. And even if it wasn't perfect, maybe love, like cooking, was more about discovery, learning, and savoring every moment, a beautiful mess that somehow always managed to nourish the soul. It was a standard Friday night at our house, and the air was thick with the smell of freshly baked brownies and popcorn that I had just finished tossing in the air fryer. As the matriarch of my family and an ever-dedicated team mom for my daughter's softball squad, I thought I was hitting all the right notes. We had a sleepover planned for the girls after practice, a popular tradition that usually saw kids raiding our pantry for snacks until someone inevitably flops into a sugar coma. I had decided to swing for the fences this time, metaphorically speaking, with a spread that I thought would resonate: chips, soda, candy, you name it, everything I deemed fun and sleepover worthy. But as the girls poured in, all giggles and energy, my heart sank a little when I caught sight of one of the other moms standing by the snack table with a look of horror etched across her face. "Oh wow, I didn't think we were having a junk food party," she quipped with a tight smile, and it felt like the air had stopped circulating for a moment. You see, this particular mom, Lisa, prided herself on health. She lectured everyone during meetings about nutrition and how vital it was for our children, especially athletes, to have the right fuel. My mind started racing. Was I actually doing something wrong? The girls, oblivious to the tension brewing, dug into the snacks with glee, but I felt undeniably uneasy. I recalled when I was a kid, and sleepovers were a chaotic mix of soda and treats, with laughter drowned out only by the sound of a completely exhausted mom trying to keep the volume down. So why did it feel different now, like I was some villain for wanting my daughter to just enjoy the simplicity of junk food at a sleepover? As Lisa continued to sip on her herbal tea and lecture the other moms who didn't seem too worried, my anxiety turned into a defensive flare-up, and I could feel myself brimming with irritation. I finally blurted out something like, "It's just one night, and they deserve to have fun." But instantly regretted it when Lisa gave me that classic "I'm disappointed" look. The girls continued munching away, but I, unfortunately, was caught in a spiral of doubt, wondering if maybe I had put the ultimate parental foot wrong by not adhering to a strict playbook of health guidelines that I never signed up for. The tension in the air grew, and as the night wore on, I kept picturing the conversations that were taking place behind my back. Would they question if I was a good mom for allowing this? Did they think I didn't care about their health? As the girls shouted for comedies in the living room, my heart softened thinking about the laughter I had intended to cultivate with my choices. Moments passed, and they were bouncing off walls, connecting in joy. It ignited a flicker of comfort in my chest, until out of the blue, one of the girls, Emma, threw up after a particularly spirited burst of sugary energy. Chaos erupted. Lisa whipped around dramatically as if I were solely responsible for this culinary catastrophe, which only fueled the anxiety swirling within me. As I cleaned up the mess with 1,000 apologies spilling from my lips, I caught a glimpse of the other mother's stifling laughter, and I realized that my fears of being judged might have been blown way out of proportion. I discovered that Lisa's health obsession didn't resonate with a lot of the other moms who craved a little levity amidst the grind of competitive youth sports. By the end of the night, even Lisa was helping me, albeit reluctantly, while still casting judgmental glances, and I found solace in my daughters hugging me tightly. "That was fun, Mom," she said, and in that moment, I realized something vital. Parenting doesn't come with a defined manual, and sometimes you just need to let kids be kids, even if it means extra junk on a special night. I went to bed that night reflecting on how our choices shape our children's memories, and I fell asleep wondering if Lisa's comments would still sting in the morning. In the weeks that followed, I did have conversations with other parents that highlighted varying opinions about nutrition and fun, and while a few still sided with Lisa, many came to my defense, sharing that they, too, remember the sheer joy of junk food and chaos from their own childhoods. I found a cool balance moving forward, incorporating a mix of healthier snacks into the mix while preserving those nostalgic treats, and reminded myself that while we all want the best for our kids, fun and freedom have their own essential place in growing up. Maybe in the grand scheme of things, there's more than one way to be a good mom, one that includes a little more love and a little less judgment. Reflecting on that night, I felt an array of emotions swirling inside me, a blend of relief and residual tension that lingered long after the sleepover chaos had faded. The laughter and the smell of popcorn had long been replaced by the soft hush of the night, but the lingering whispers of doubt still echoed in my mind. Sure, I'd found a way to balance the snacks, but a part of me wondered if I had truly won any battle. Why was I so shaken by Lisa's opinion? I prided myself on being a laid-back mom, one who encouraged fun and creativity, yet here I was, caught up in a whirlwind of guilt over a plate piled high with nachos and gummy bears. Later that week, as I drove the girls to practice, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. My daughter Amelia, perched in the back seat with her friends, was laughing uncontrollably over some inside joke, her face lit up like a Christmas tree. That simple joy made my heart swell. In that moment, I realized I was the architect of those giggly memories. I had chosen to let them have that vibrant night, embracing the wild spirit of childhood. Yet, I couldn't help but glance up at the school in front of me, wondering if tomorrow it would be a soft reminder of Lisa's judgment or a celebration of my commitment to being a good mother. One evening, while sorting through Amelia's backpack, I stumbled upon a handwritten note. It was a small, folded piece of paper, and my curiosity pricked at me. I opened it, and there in her familiar scrawl was a thank you note that made my heart ache with sweetness. "Thank you for the best sleepover ever, Mom. You let me have fun and brought smiles to my friends' faces." In that moment, everything came rushing back, the messy fun, the laughter, the absurdity of our midnight snack creations. My heart tightened, a wave of gratitude washed over me, reminding me how becoming a mother had transformed my perspective. As the weeks rolled on, something remarkable happened. I began embracing the idea that nurturing wasn't always about strictness, that it could coexist with silliness, an epiphany that settled comfortably in my mind. The days became a warm embrace of mixed snacks, Saturday movie marathons, and occasional baking soirees where the only rule was if it doesn't look good, it still tastes amazing. It's funny how a sleepover, and all the drama that came with it, could circle back into something nourishing, filling the gaps with laughter rather than tracking rules. With time, I learned to tune out Lisa's opinions and forge my own version of motherhood, one where every smile my daughter wore was worth its weight in sugar. I'd texted Lisa a few times since then, bridging our conversation with casual updates about practice and games, and while she remained polite, the tension between us lingered like an awkward dance. Sometimes, though, I still questioned if I was being too lenient or allowing too much chaos, yet I realized a little chaotic fun, even in the form of junk food, was a gift I was proud to give. On a Sunday afternoon, I brought out the rainbow sprinkles and ice cream, throwing an impromptu ice cream social for Amelia and her friends. They squealed with delight as the ice cream dripped and the sprinkles cascaded over piled high cones. Each burst of laughter felt like a gentle reminder: every day doesn't need to fit into a mold, every meal doesn't need to be perfect. Instead, I learned to celebrate this wild, messy, beautiful phase called childhood, where chaos had its rightful place alongside lessons of moderation. So, was I really the asshole for that sleepover? Maybe a little for being too concerned about the opinions of others, but not for letting my daughter revel in a night of joy. In the grand picture of life, it turned out that love, laughter, and a little sprinkle of chaos were all essential ingredients in crafting lasting memories. As I watched Amelia laugh and play with her friends, effortlessly lost in their bubble of happiness, I knew I was okay with all the contradictions and complexities of parenthood. At the end of the day, I was simply doing my best, and that felt perfect enough. As I settled into the comfortable chaos of our living room, a wave of relief washed over me. The night had transformed from a battlefield of expectations into a tapestry woven with laughter, illuminated by the sporadic bursts of giggles that echoed against the walls, clashing against my doubts like fireworks in the night sky. I sat back on the couch, an oversized bowl of popcorn nestled on my lap, my heart swelling as I observed Amelia and her friends sprawled out across the floor, their individual quirks forming a beautiful mosaic of childhood. I baked those brownies with chunks of chocolate that probably had more sugar than cocoa. They'd turned out to be a hit, their sweet scent melding with the salty popcorn and cheesy nachos that we all started burying ourselves in. Yet, there was still that niggling thought, that seed of insecurity stemming from my conversation with Lisa. Did I really go too far in choosing the menu for the sleepover? Were my intentions, initially pure and joyful, overshadowed by my worry of not fitting the mold of what a responsible mom should be? I wanted to be an influential figure in their lives, an anchor they could return to, but here I was, casting aside the boundary of moderation in this one small area. As much as I prayed my daughter wouldn't be consumed by the judgments of others, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd somehow let her down by embracing the fun side of food instead of becoming the health-conscious mom. But then I looked again. The sight before me, a pile of pillows and blankets, laughter spilling into every corner, was a reminder of the freedom I'd wanted for her. Each girl had a slice of pizza in one hand and a brownie in the other, cheeks smeared with splotches of melted chocolate. Their bond over those treats felt sacred, a moment stolen from the everyday obligations of being children. I recalled my own sleepovers filled with late-night snacks and whispered secrets, how those nights had cajoled the stars out of me, age-old friendships cemented over laughter and late-night debates about which boy band was the best. "Can we have a dance party next?" Amelia suggested, lighting up with that uncontainable energy only youth can possess. The girls erupted into an agreement, and they jumped to their feet like a pack of puppies. I laughed. A dance party wasn't exactly part of the itinerary. But then, what's an itinerary when you're young and alive? As the music started blaring from the speaker, I got up to join them, hesitant at first, but willing to let the rhythm sweep me into their world. I swung my arms, letting go of any remaining self-consciousness while they twirled around me, losing themselves to the beat. For a brief moment, I was that age again, slipping into the simplicity of life without the weight of judgment. The laughter morphed into a chorus of delight, and in that dance, I felt the gentle reminder that while structure is essential, spontaneity breathes life into our existence. Just then, my phone buzzed, and it was a text from Lisa. "Hey, I've been thinking about what you said and I wanted to apologize for being judgmental. You're doing great, and maybe I have some things to work on too." A warmth spread through me. Maybe my heart wasn't racing as much from my worries tonight. Maybe, just maybe, in this complex world, we were all navigating something wholly imperfect together. As I hit reply, I felt resolute. "Thank you, Lisa. We all have our style. Let's collaborate on the next sleepover." The night wore on, a gentle spiral into laughter and camaraderie. As the girls eventually flopped down onto sleeping bags, sleepy-eyed and full of sugar, I knew that in that moment, I'd created a safe space for them to breathe, to thrive. I slipped into my own refuge of reflection, accepting that I was not just a mom who fed her kids junk food but a creator of memories, a guardian of joy. Behind the cozy chaos, love had poured in, filling every corner. And in that messy, beautiful night, I learned once more that sometimes being the best parent means letting go of the whole right and wrong approach, simply allowing love, laughter, and a sprinkle of fun to lead the way. It was a Saturday afternoon when I found myself sitting across from my younger brother, Sam, in our favorite coffee shop, the air filled with the rich aroma of brewing espresso and baked goods that set my nerves on edge more than I cared to admit. I loved Sam, really, he was funny and sweet, but sometimes his quirks, an endearing part of his autism, would test my patience. As he meticulously explained the minutiae of a video game I had no interest in, he kept pausing to correct me whenever I mispronounced a character's name or misunderstood the plot. I could feel the familiar irritation bubbling up, making me wonder if I was the only one who noticed. "You don't have to correct me every single time," I finally blurted out, looking down at my coffee cup as if I were trying to see my own troubled reflection in the dark liquid. The cafe was buzzing around us, but in that moment, it felt like we were in our own world, one where I was both the older sibling and, apparently, the villain. I looked at Sam, his expression shifting from shock to hurt, and immediately wanted to retract my words. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that." But he didn't reply, just stared at his half-eaten muffin, as if the crumbs had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the room. I knew I should have just let him share his passion without interruption. After all, this was what made Sam happy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost my temper and crossed a line. My thoughts raced, I was tired, overwhelmed with work and everyday life's pressures, yet here was my brother, excitedly sharing a piece of his world with me. Shouldn't I be more supportive? And yet, this constant need for accuracy felt suffocating at times. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became with myself. My silence hung heavy between us until he finally whispered, "I just want to help." In that moment, it hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't merely about a character's name. It was about Sam wanting to connect, to share his knowledge, and my dismissiveness had dimmed that spark. As we left the cafe, I resolved to be more patient, to remember that my brother's corrections didn't stem from a desire to belittle me but from a place of connection, even if it sometimes felt stifling. A couple of weeks later, I found myself texting him random things I was learning from a podcast about his favorite games, asking for his thoughts and deepening our conversations. We still had our moments, sure, I still occasionally winced when he'd launch into a correction I didn't ask for. But each time it happened, I reminded myself why I loved hearing him speak about his passions, and I found my frustrations melting away. I'd like to think I wasn't the asshole in this story after all, but someone learning to navigate this complex bond. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when it hit me just how much progress we'd made. I was curled up on the couch with a steaming mug of tea, listening to the sound of raindrops tapping against the window, and I had this overwhelming urge to share something exciting I'd learned about an upcoming game release that we'd both been anticipating. Instead of the involuntary dread I usually felt, I picked up my phone, hesitated for just a moment, and texted him. "Hey, I just read they're adding an interdimensional feature to the new game, can you believe it?" Within seconds, my brother's text alert chimed. "Yeah. Interdimensional travel means they could really expand the story. I hope they keep the parallel universe idea in mind." I felt a surge of warmth in my chest, a connection that felt more genuine than any correction he'd ever thrown my way. It was moments like these that reminded me how deep our bond ran, masked beneath layers of quirks and differences. Of course, that didn't mean everything was perfect. Just a week later, I made the seemingly innocent mistake of calling one of the game characters a villain during one of our usual gaming sessions. Almost instantly, he shot back a correction, pointing out that the character's motives were far more complex than my casual label suggested. "You know his backstory is about redemption, right? You can't just label him like that." I felt the familiar sting of irritation creeping back in, but I paused. I was about to reply with a snarky retort when I remembered the conversations we had been sharing, the laughter and insights eclipsing the corrections. Instead, I took a breath and said, "Fair point. I needed that reminder. I sometimes get way too caught up in my impressions." His surprise was palpable even through the screen. "Glad you see it that way. The story is nuanced. Learning and understanding make it even more exciting." He didn't know it, but I was beginning to feel the weight of my previous frustrations lift, replaced with a sense of appreciation for how much more he had to offer. Slowly, I started consciously approaching our conversations with curiosity rather than defensiveness. Sometimes I'd even invite his corrections, framing them as challenges rather than annoyances. It became a game of sorts. What knowledge could he share next? Our hangouts transformed from mere game nights into deep dives where he could geek out about characters, plot points, and storytelling techniques. Yes, I still occasionally winced at the over-explanations or overly detailed corrections, but now, instead of seeing them as bothersome interruptions, I began to find them oddly charming. They were pieces of my brother that shaped him into who he was, a passionate perfectionist with a heart bursting at the seams for his interests. I also discovered that in those moments of explaining, something beautiful happened. We were bonding over the nuances of the narratives we both adored. One Sunday, we decided to take a break from our usual weekend routine to watch a movie marathon based on some of our favorite game franchises. A few hours in, I noticed something magical unfolding. He was animated, speaking excitedly about how he would adapt the stories differently. "You know, if I were to write this, I'd change the ending completely. It's not true to the character's development," he said, eyes bright with enthusiasm. Instead of asking him to dial it back or find a quieter volume, I just smiled and nodded, letting his passion wash over me like an invigorating wave. I chimed in with my own ideas, and before long, we were brainstorming a story of our own, piecing together plot lines and character arcs as if screenwriting was a game in itself. It felt like both of us were learning in that moment, not just about the movies or games we loved, but about each other, who we were as siblings, and how we could evolve. I had to admit, there was something healing about this shift. I've learned that sometimes, it takes a little vulnerability to bring two people closer. Maybe I wasn't just tolerating his corrections anymore. Maybe I was actually embracing his perspective, recognizing that our divergent approaches were a tapestry that made our relationship rich and vibrant. As the rain continued to patter softly against the windows, I luxuriated in the knowledge that we were navigating this complex relationship together. I found myself feeling grateful, hoping that even as my brother poured out corrections, I could do my part to help him see that his voice mattered to me. It may still get complicated sometimes, but I felt that complexity was what made our bond so beautifully unique. And maybe, just maybe, it was this all-encompassing journey through learning and understanding that turned out to be the real win. One quiet afternoon, as I perched on the edge of my bed, fully immersed in the imaginary worlds of my favorite fantasy novel, my phone buzzed insistently. It was him, of course, my brother, the ever-passionate encyclopedia of all things gaming. I felt a tingle of excitement mixed with a hint of anxiety, that familiar nod as I wondered if this text would be another innocent inquiry or a deep dive into one of his meticulous corrections. Did you know that in the lore of Arcadia, the main character actually has a hidden backstory that ties in with the prophecy? I smiled at his enthusiasm, picturing him animatedly pacing around his room while typing. "Yeah, I just learned about that on a podcast," I replied, careful to convey my interest. That's when he dropped it. "I'm glad you like it, but you actually missed a couple of key points. You see." And there it was, that familiar avalanche of information I hadn't asked for, cascading down like an unexpected rain shower. My first instinct was to feel that familiar frustration rising, a heat creeping up my neck. But this time something clicked inside me. Instead of letting that prickly feeling take hold, I chose to breathe, sinking deeper into the moment, feeling the vulnerability behind his enthusiasm. I wasn't just being corrected, I was witnessing his excitement and love for a topic that mattered deeply to him. "Dude, I really appreciate you sharing this with me," I texted back, "and I'm totally here for the details. But I also want to dive into this together, you know? I want to connect over it, not just absorb facts." There was a pause, and for a moment, I worried I might have crossed a line again. But a few moments later, my phone chimed with his reply. "Okay, I can try that. I just get really excited, and I want you to know everything." And in those few exchanged messages, I felt like I was glimpsing a new layer of our relationship, one built on understanding, empathy, and respect. The rain continued to rhythmically tap against the glass, a soothing soundtrack to my thoughts as I contemplated how this new approach could alleviate that tension that sometimes bubbled between us. It felt like stepping into a dance. I was learning the rhythm, realizing I didn't have to lead or follow, just move together. In the weeks that followed, our conversations evolved in unexpected ways. We began sharing our interpretations of his favorite games, parsing through characters and plots, discovering that sharing ideas was just as enriching as correcting each other. One Thursday evening, we settled down for a marathon of an old game, the kind that made us both nostalgic. As I stumbled through levels and faced wily enemies, he grinned at my blunders but hesitated to correct me. Instead, he cheered me on, his encouragement washing over me like a warm breeze. I could feel the shift in our dynamic, like turning a page in a book where the story finally aligns. By the time I slammed that virtual sword into the final boss, we both erupted into cheers, the air thick with camaraderie. It was genuine. It was beautiful. Reflecting on our journey, I realized we were two flawed yet perfectly unique characters navigating this intricate world together, learning to appreciate each other's quirks. Sure, there might be hiccups now and then, maybe some unexpected corrections still would slip through, but now, when they did, I'd remind myself of this growth, this bond that was as rich and vibrant as the stories woven into our favorite games. Looking back, I didn't just learn how to handle those moments of correction, I learned to cherish our conversations, seeing them as threads that connected us in ways I never fully understood before. This journey wasn't just about me, it was about us building and redefining how we communicated. And as I sank into my pillow that night, listening to the pitter-patter of the rain, I felt so much more at peace with the trials of our relationship, grateful to navigate this complex tapestry together, wondering what stories we would continue to weave as we journeyed forward. You know that feeling when you're sitting at a bar, nursing an overpriced whiskey, and you think, today couldn't possibly get any worse? Well, that was me last Tuesday. I had just wrapped up a job interview for what I thought was my dream position. I'd meticulously prepared for weeks, so naturally, when I bombed the final question, I felt like I'd just thrown my future out the window. As I stared into my glass, feeling sorry for myself, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a Facebook message from Rachel, one of my old coworkers. We hadn't spoken since I left that job, and if I'm being completely honest, I wasn't super eager to hear from her. Rachel had a knack for being overly critical. She'd always found a way to step in when she thought I was screwing up, usually in front of the whole team. A real joy at 9 a.m. on a Monday, right? So, I hesitated before opening the message. "Hey, I just saw your post about that interview. I hope you did well. Just in case you need any references, let me know." Sweet, right? But a part of me stiffened. I didn't want her help. I needed to distance myself from the toxicity of that workplace, and Rachel was absolutely a part of it. Fueled by whiskey, I typed out a response that I probably shouldn't have. "Thanks, but I'd prefer not to reach out. You and I never quite saw eye to eye at work." I hit send, taken aback by my own boldness. What was I thinking? The warmth in my cheeks reminded me I was still processing rejection from the interview, and maybe I had a little more to drink than I should have. The reply came quicker than I anticipated. "What do you mean? I thought we had a good working relationship." It felt like a slap to the face. Good working relationship? Seriously? Something snapped in me. I was just done. I fired back, "Honestly, I don't like you, Rachel. We didn't have a good relationship, you constantly made me second-guess everything, and frankly, I was relieved when I left." There it was, louder than my own thoughts. After a moment of silence, I realized the bar had gone quiet, and I could feel the eyes from a couple of the patrons on me. Oh great, now I was the spectacle. Rachel didn't retaliate, but her typing dots popped up and disappeared. My stomach twisted. Why had I opened this Pandora's box? Finally, her response was blunt. Wow, I didn't realize I affected you so much. Part of me wanted to take it back, to feign a moment of weakness and resolve it like adults do. But another part wanted to just bask in the clarity of my honesty, even if it terrified me. That night, as I replayed our conversation, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and guilt. Maybe I didn't need to have said it in such a public way, but honestly, I had operated under denial for too long, and now the truth was hanging in the air, an exposed nerve I couldn't ignore. In a moment of vulnerable self-reflection, I decided I needed to accept my feelings, however harsh they were. The overwhelming urge to redact was met with a deep-seated understanding. I had finally set a boundary. Fast forward a week, and I learned Rachel had shared our exchange with the whole office, whether out of petty revenge or as some sort of misguided lesson in accountability. The office chatter spiraled, and I became that girl who told off her coworker. It wasn't exactly the outcome I envisioned, but it did bring some clarity. I realized a significant part of my discomfort in the workplace wasn't just Rachel's critiques, but how I allowed her voice to overshadow mine. I had a choice now. I could remain silent about the kind of work environment I wanted, or I could advocate for it fiercely. I chose the latter. Ultimately, it became a turning point. Being honest set me free in ways I didn't expect. Sure, I had momentarily alienated myself from a crowd, perhaps dealing that infamous blow of social discomfort, but sometimes, severing ties is what leads to new beginnings. I sat down at my desk that following Monday, and for the first time, I felt lighter, empowered to not just question but also dictate my worth, and honestly, isn't that what we all strive for after walking away from a toxic environment? In its own way, perhaps I had started stirring the pot, and now my own recipe was coming together. Who knew a drunken confrontation could pave the way for something entirely unexpected? I took a deep breath and settled into that newfound empowerment, my fingers dancing over the keyboard as I tackled emails with a clarity I'd lacked before. The awkwardness from Friday's confrontation still buzzed softly in the back of my mind, but surprisingly, it didn't weigh me down. If anything, it emboldened me to navigate my workday with a sharper sense of who I was and what I wanted. The air felt different, as if I'd shaken off dust that had settled too thickly over the months spent tiptoeing around the opinions of others. Still, it wasn't as simple as I had hoped. I glanced up occasionally, my former coworker, Liam, hovering around the break room, bantering with others. There was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Some friends avoided his gaze while others awkwardly laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. And then there was me, torn between relief and guilt. Yes, I'd said what I had to, but watching him try to fit back into the dynamic with forced smiles tugged at something within me. Was I the one who had thrown the first stone, or had I merely uncovered something that was always rotting beneath the surface? After the day stretched on, I found myself in a meeting where he made a comment that was, quite frankly, absurd. The room contained an array of reactions, nervous giggles, suppressed eye rolls, but I felt it sharper. The urge to call him out again gnawed at my insides, but this time, I held my tongue. The last confrontation had rocked the boat enough. My job wasn't worth the backlash of becoming the office pariah. I decided instead to be the observer, taking mental notes of how people interacted with one another, how toxic conversations shifted like the tides, and recognizing that I was free to swim away from that shoreline. Later, as I was packing up for the day, a nagging thought played in my head. Was my confrontation worth the unraveling it caused? It felt good to speak my truth, but I didn't want to spiral into another black hole of conflict. I let it roll around for the rest of the evening, along with the slower moving hum of my thoughts. I got home and poured myself a glass of wine, sank into my couch, and turned on a show that I knew would soothe my restless brain. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled until I found that subreddit I frequented. As I typed out my experiences, framing it just right to elicit some feedback, I felt a tide of hope. Maybe I wasn't an asshole for wanting respect, but even writing those words out made me realize the complexity of it all. We are social creatures, but we often forget that the cost of fitting in can sometimes be the highest price of all. The next day, I entered the office, buoyed by the feedback I'd already received from various users on Reddit. Many encouraged me to keep being true to myself, while others raised valid points that got me thinking. Maybe with subtlety rather than outright honesty, there could be a middle ground. Just then, I spotted Liam at the far corner of the break room, isolated but not entirely alone. He was talking to Sarah, an old friend of mine from another department. My heart sank slightly. Was this the moment we should talk about what happened? I hesitated, my mind racing. Did I really want to address it like adults? I noticed Sarah laugh at something he said, and with it came a twinge of jealousy I didn't know I had. Suddenly, I craved closure, but I wouldn't allow myself to be the one to initiate it. My ego clashed with my desire for peace, but as I moved to pour a cup of coffee, I caught Liam's eye. He smirked, and something shifted inside me, something dark lifted, and instead of feeling anger, I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me. Maybe he was just navigating his way through this strange office dynamic as I was. I took a sip of my coffee, suddenly deciding that I wouldn't avoid him anymore. Maybe once bitten, twice shy, but I was done living like the awkward chess piece caught between an unyielding game. For better or worse, the echoes of that night still lingered, but instead of defining what I did wrong, they ignited a new curiosity. As I made my way back to my desk, I felt lighter, braced by the possibilities that lay ahead. After all, if I could be strong enough to voice my dislike, then maybe I could also find the courage to create new connections. I smiled softly at the thought, understanding now that growth often springs from the messy and uncomfortable feelings we try to push aside. It was about time for all of us to step up or move aside. As the days passed, I started noticing little shifts around me that reflected my newfound resolve. I interacted with coworkers I had previously ignored, the ones whose small talk seemed trivial in the shadow of my ex-coworkers' drama. Each interaction was a gentle electric charge, awakening a part of me that had long felt dormant. One afternoon, during a lunch break that felt too quiet, I joined a few colleagues who usually sat at a different table. They were discussing a recent movie, laughter punctuating their conversation. Without thinking much, I chimed in with my own take on it, surprised at how easily my words flowed. They welcomed my input as if I had always belonged there, and with each laugh shared, my confidence grew. I began to realize that I could carve out my space without pretending to be someone I wasn't. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. I still had to navigate the aftermath of that confrontation with my ex-coworker, Julian. Word had spread through the office grapevine. I could almost feel the unspoken questions pulsing in the air whenever I passed by my old teammates. Did you really say that? You called him out? I felt their curiosity like heat against my skin, and sometimes it was unsettling. One morning, I found a message from Julian, through an app we once used to communicate during work. His words were careful and almost businesslike. Can we talk? I'd like to clear the air. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. On one hand, I wanted to dismiss him completely, unwilling to reopen that wound. Still, a part of me felt compelled to understand what he might say. Maybe he was genuinely sorry, or maybe he'd warped the narrative to cast himself as the victim. Deciding to meet felt like a reckless gamble. When I arrived at the cafe, I spotted him at a corner table, his posture almost defensive, hands clasped tightly over his coffee cup. I chose not to sit opposite him and instead settled into the chair next to him, creating a barrier, perhaps as a quiet reminder that this space we had once shared had fundamentally changed. Julian opened with a hesitant compliment about my courage during that night. I wasn't expecting you to say anything, honestly, he said, and I sensed a mixture of surprise and irritation in his tone. People usually just let me walk over them. I couldn't help but scoff, the sound escaping before I could rein it in. You know, you've made a habit of stomping on others to get ahead. Maybe that's why no one stood up to you before. The challenge hung in the air, and our eyes locked, a shared moment of confrontation that felt strangely invigorating. His expression shifted, caught between irritation and a hint of self-awareness. I didn't realize I was coming off like that, he said slowly, as if genuinely processing my words. We continued to talk, the tension ebbing and flowing, dissecting the past while carefully avoiding reliving it. I could still sense the defensive walls he held up, but there were flickers of vulnerability, almost like he was testing the waters to see if I would lash out again. We spoke for nearly an hour, and I found myself, surprisingly, feeling some degree of empathy for him. Here was a person who, despite his shortcomings, was human and complex. We parted ways that day without any grand gestures of reconciliation, just a simple nod of recognition that we had laid a few cards on the table. As I walked away, the weight on my chest lifted a little more. In the weeks that followed, I realized how much my decisions had shifted the dynamics of my workplace, taking the first step toward forging a community that felt less about keeping up appearances and more about honest connections. It opened doors to deeper conversations infused with real understanding. I found myself surrounded by allies rather than competitors, and we collaborated on projects with a synergy I had never experienced before. Reflecting on that night now, I can't help but marvel at how a single act of clarity and confrontation, however messy it was, laid the groundwork for a healthier environment. Sometimes we must be uncomfortable to unearth the beauty in our connections. Julian sent an unexpected message weeks later, just a single thumbs up emoji after I presented a project idea we both worked on. I chuckled at how far we'd come, and in that moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. There's strength in authenticity, I realized, and I was finally ready to embrace it. I never thought something as trivial as skincare samples could lead to a mini-dramatic saga in my life, but here we are. You see, I'm somewhat of a beauty aficionado. There's just something about the glossy packaging and the promise of glowing skin that gets me every time. Recently, I placed a rather extravagant order with one of my favorite online brands, and in the box, among my beloved new serums and creams, were several freebies, an enticing array of moisturizers, eye creams, and masks. I was practically vibrating with excitement when I opened the package, my heart racing at the thought of testing out all these new products. But then I got a message from my friend Olivia, who I swear has some sort of sixth sense for when I'm hunting for skincare goodies. She casually asked if I'd share one of the freebies with her. At first, my instinct was to say yes. After all, we've been friends for years, and it's not like I wouldn't eventually use them all, but then a little voice in my head started whispering doubts. Olivia has a habit of always wanting something from me. Whether it's borrowing clothes or asking for my food, she rarely offers anything in return, and a seed of resentment was starting to sprout. I poured myself a glass of water and paced my tiny kitchen, considering all these thoughts swirling in my mind. Would giving her a sample feel like giving in? Did that make me selfish? What if this was just one more scenario where I was letting her take advantage of my kindness? I knew it sounded ridiculous, but I could almost hear the chorus of friends in my head saying, "You're not obligated to give her anything." After mulling it over, I typed a hesitant response saying I was really excited about the samples and wanted to keep them all for myself this time. Her reaction was swift and sharp, like a dagger to the gut. "Wow, thanks for nothing," she replied, followed by that pregnant pause of silence that spoke volumes. I could feel dread creeping in as I anticipated the fallout. Days went by in this weird in-between space where I felt nauseous about our friendship. I tried not to think about Olivia scrolling through Instagram, likely wondering if she should unfriend me. The guilt was unbearable. Even though I told myself I was in the right, it didn't feel that way at all. I'd lay in bed at night staring at the ceiling while replaying our conversations in my mind, convinced I had ruined our friendship over a trivial tube of moisturizer. When I did get a call from her a week later, my heart sank. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have snapped at you," she said, and I could hear the sincerity lacing her tone, but part of me still felt vulnerable, hanging on the defensive. I'm ashamed to admit that I let our previous exchanges color my view. We met up for coffee, and rather than bringing it up, I tossed the tension in my back pocket, hoping it would remain there for good. Over lattes and pastries, we slowly patched things up, exchanging laughter and stories of our most ridiculous beauty blunders. Then came the moment I didn't expect, when Olivia leaned in and confessed how she had been feeling insecure about her struggle with skincare lately, always comparing herself to me like I was somehow the beauty guru supreme. That simple moment of vulnerability shifted everything for me. I realized this wasn't just about a tube of eye cream, it was about wanting to feel good enough, not just for others but for ourselves. As we packed up our things and said our goodbyes, I felt lighter, like a fog had lifted. I still didn't give her a sample, but I learned something far more valuable about compassion and friendship. Maybe I wasn't the asshole for wanting to keep a little something for myself, but I'd like to think I could open up my heart a little more, and next time, maybe instead of a sample, I could offer her a different kind of support. We all have our battles, whether they're fought with skincare products or self-esteem, and I think there's enough love to go around if we let it. Sitting on my couch later that evening, the remnants of our conversation flickered through my mind like a movie reel. The sunlight had dipped low, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson, and it was a moment that asked for reflection. I curled up in my favorite blanket, clean and soft against my skin, and I could still hear the gentle thrum of Carla's voice, the way it had wavered just slightly when she talked about her struggles. It had always been challenging for her to navigate the world of self-care, not just in terms of the products we used but in understanding that taking care of ourselves wasn't something we should feel guilty about. I had often hoped to impart that wisdom to her, but my protective instincts had kicked in, convincing me that keeping the samples I earned felt justifiable, especially when I'd put in the effort to justify the splurge. I pulled out my phone almost subconsciously, scrolling through messages and photographs until I landed on one I had saved of my latest skincare haul, beautiful products lined up, glistening in the sunlight, each promising a new layer of comfort and confidence. But the excitement had dulled a little now, more of a reminder than a trophy. Instead of rushing to put it away, I paused on the image, feeling a twinge of guilt I hadn't expected. It was easy to say I'd offered enough just by sharing my thoughts and support, but had I truly been a good friend? What about the little secrets we shared, the plans to embark on a self-care weekend together one day, a day where we'd pamper ourselves without a hitch? I closed my eyes and pictured us at my kitchen table, masks slathered on, giggling as we debated which Instagram skincare trend we should try next, our laughter echoing through the room like a bomb. The thought soothed me, propelling me to realize that friendship wasn't one-sided. Maybe I could bridge that gap of selfishness by reaching out, even in small ways. "Hey, Carla," I texted slowly, "I was just thinking about our plans for a self-care day. How about we do it this weekend? My place, your favorite snacks?" I paused, biting my lip, hesitating over the next part. I wanted to offer more than just casual companionship. I wanted her to know it was reciprocal, that her battles truly mattered to me. "And I can share some of the new products with you if you're interested. We can take a look together." As the message sent, I felt a surge of relief. I wasn't erasing my prior hesitation about sharing my samples, but rather transforming it into something more meaningful, something I could offer that wasn't just a quick fix but a long-awaited connection. It registered as a reminder: vulnerability could be a bridge, not a barrier. Moments later, my phone buzzed with a reply, and I nearly held my breath. "I'd love that. You're the best." I smiled back at the screen, warmth spreading through me. Just as I was about to climb into my own thoughts, a message popped up, filled with an array of heart emojis. My heart swelled as the reality hit me: sharing didn't always mean losing something of myself. Sometimes, it meant discovering a depth of friendship, a bond stronger than any surface mask. I thought of how I would show up for her, next time, not waiting for samples but rather, embracing moments that knitted our hearts closer. That night, I drifted off to sleep with a sense of hope hanging in the air, ready to explore what our little self-care weekend might bring, understanding that every relationship needs nurturing, just like our skin, both requiring gentle care and sometimes, a sprinkle of love. The next day was one for the books, a slow Sunday morning filled with the soft promise of new beginnings. I brewed a steaming cup of chamomile tea, letting the comforting aroma wrap around me like a warm blanket. As I sat on my well-loved sofa, the sun poured through the blinds, casting playful patterns across the room. I thought about how I could turn this seemingly trivial skincare conflict into something more meaningful. It hit me that I could invite Lisa over for a proper self-care day instead of simply waiting for our regular hangouts to become about swapping products. I envisioned a skincare extravaganza, 3 types of face masks, homemade scrubs, and a playlist filled with all our favorite tunes from college. I wanted to create a space where we could laugh, cry, and talk about everything, the gossipy surface stuff and the deeper issues we sometimes skimmed over, tapping into how our battles with skin insecurities mirrored our struggles with self-acceptance. That week, I shot Lisa a text, inviting her over for our self-care extravaganza. I added an emoji of a face mask because who could resist that? To my delight, she responded with a flurry of enthusiasm, and just like that, I felt a little spark of joy ignite inside me. On Saturday, as we prepared for our day together, I set out all my favorite skincare items, the delightful textures, the riot of scents. My bathroom transformed into a mini spa, complete with soft towels and even a couple of candles that flickered gently in the dim light. The setup looked like something out of a trendy Instagram post, but I cared more about the experience than aesthetics. It wasn't long before Lisa arrived, and as soon as she stepped in, her face lit up, a mirroring reflection of my own excitement. We settled onto the floor, armed with our masks and goofiness, and the laughter flowed easily, freeing us from the strains of our daily lives. We tried to put on our masks while discussing everything from work woes to the anxieties keeping her up at night. As we applied our clay masks, I encouraged her to embrace the idea of letting go of those harsh judgments we both had about ourselves. After all, as our skin dried beneath the thick layer, we joked about how ridiculously we both looked. It felt liberating to share our fears, to validate each other's struggles without judgment, just understanding. Yet as I watched her unwind, I realized how deeply vulnerable she was about her own skincare battles, how they seeped into her self-worth like ink on paper. It reminded me of my own feelings of inadequacy, the quiet moments of doubt that clung to me like shadows. More than once during our discussions, I could sense the struggle behind her laughter, that raw need for reassurance. I decided then that this was a pivotal moment. It wasn't about skincare samples anymore. Instead, I reached out, encouraging her to talk about the things we often sweep under the rug, all while the masks effectively dried on our faces. Toward the end of the day, when we both peeled off our masks and wiped our faces clean, I noticed something different in Lisa's demeanor, a lightness about her that hadn't been there when she'd arrived. Perhaps it was the masks, or perhaps it was the genuine connection we had fostered throughout the day. I realized that this was what friendship could be, supporting each other, peeling back layers of our insecurities together, and sharing not just products but our vulnerabilities. As our day came to a close, I felt a mixture of gratitude and fulfillment. I had opened a new chapter in our friendship, and now we both understood that sometimes, sharing our truths could be far more impactful than sharing physical stuff. She left with a parting hug that felt solid and grounding. I watched her walk away, and I couldn't help but smile. It was a beautiful reminder that while skincare might enhance our outer glow, it's the bonds we cultivate that truly illuminate our hearts. Weeks later, I'd often find myself reflecting on that day. I knew I had not just extended an invitation for a skincare session but rather created a framework for deeper conversations in our relationship. Just like the careful balance of ingredients in a skincare product, I understood that the delicate nature of friendship needed a mix of honesty, kindness, and a willingness to show up. I felt lighter, more connected, and ready for whatever life would throw our way, because maybe, in the end, it's not about the samples we hold on to, but rather the moments we create that keep our souls nourished. It was one of those Saturday afternoons where the sun seemed to hang a little lower in the sky, bathing everything in a warm golden light. I was just wrapping up my shift at the local diner, exhausted but oddly content. I had spent the day serving coffee and pancakes to the usual crowd, a familiar mix of regulars and unfamiliar faces. As I tossed my apron aside and climbed into my old truck, the smell of grease and syrup lingered, a strange comfort after a long shift. My plan was simple, a quick trip to the recycling center with a collection of cans I had saved up. I didn't think much of it, a handful of aluminum from my kitchen and the diner combined, a tiny contribution to my Friday night cleanup ritual. But as I parked in front of the recycling center, I noticed a woman standing by my truck, her eyes darting around like a squirrel on caffeine. Maybe it was the weariness of the day, or perhaps a rush of instinct, but something about her felt off. Still, I brushed it aside, pulled out my phone to scroll mindlessly through social media while I waited. A few moments passed before I looked up to see her rummaging in the back of my truck, lifting the bag of cans as if it were the Holy Grail. My heart dropped. "Hey! What are you doing?" I yelled, more out of shock than anger. I should have just let it go, but something snapped inside me. Maybe it was the day overriding my sleep-deprived brain, but I jumped out of the truck, my feet hitting the pavement with purpose. "That's mine." I found myself standing there, half expecting her to drop the bag and flee. But she turned to face me, and that's when I noticed the lines on her face, the weariness in her eyes that mirrored my own. "It's just cans," she shrugged, her voice sharp yet tinged with an edge of desperation. I felt a rush of sympathy mingling with my anger. Maybe she was struggling, maybe these cans were worth more to her than to me. Yet I thought back to how hard I worked for those pennies, each can a testament to my efforts. "I get it," I said, softer now, trying to find common ground. "But they're mine. I need to take them to recycling." The tension in the air was palpable, like rubber bands stretched to their limit. For a moment, we both stood there, two strangers caught up in an unwinnable standoff. I wasn't a confrontational person by nature. I often preferred to drift through the world rather than disturb the status quo, but here I was, presenting a challenge. Something flickered in her eyes, a mixture of anger, shame, and maybe a hint of vulnerability. "This is how I pay for my kids' lunch," she blurted out, her voice cracking. My heart softened further, each beat echoing doubt in my mind. Was I an asshole for wanting to stand my ground? Was I denying her the means to survive? I took a deep breath and tried to rationalize it all. "I'm sure you're struggling. I get it. But I can't just give this to you." We hovered in this uncomfortable limbo, the weight of her desperation palpable. The bags of cans and my anger felt so trivial in the face of her honesty. I felt torn, split between being protective of my meager possessions and recognizing a need that resonated deep within my own heart. In a moment that felt like an eternity, I decided to compromise. "How about this? I'll help you gather more cans, and you can take any we find together. I could use an extra set of hands." The tension peaked for a split second, then slowly began to unravel. Her brow furrowed in disbelief as if trying to gauge my sincerity. "You wouldn't just call the cops?" she asked, her body relaxing but still cautious. I shook my head. "No, I won't. We're just two people trying to get by." In the end, we spent the next half hour combing through the neighborhood, collecting discarded cans. As we gathered our bounty, we talked. I learned her name was Maggie and that she was a single mother struggling to make ends meet. She was filled with laughter that sounded both weary and hopeful. I realized that my earlier irritation was so small compared to the stories people were carrying, including my own. When we finished, we looked at our small haul, and I dug into my pocket to pull out a $10 bill. "Here. Just for today," I said, feeling a warmth build in my chest. "This might not be much, but go buy those kids a few sandwiches." Maggie hesitated for a moment, then accepted the money, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, and for the first time that day, I felt something within me lift, a sort of lightness that came from sharing the burden. I drove away that day with my heart heavier yet somehow also free, reflecting on how sometimes standing your ground could mean building a bridge instead. Months later, I still think about that afternoon. Did it fix everything? No. Did I get my cans back? Well, I learned to look beyond those cans for a moment, beyond possessions and comfort. I guess the world isn't just about fighting to protect what's yours. Sometimes, it's about recognizing what you can give up and seeing how far kindness can stretch, even if it comes from unexpected places. In a way, we both walked away with something that day, just not what we initially thought we needed. It's funny how life teaches you lessons in the most unpredictable ways. That day with the woman and my bag of cans shifted something deep within me, though the overt changes weren't immediate. I still had that tiny moment etched in my memory, the way her eyes briefly lit up when I handed her a couple of dollars, how taken aback she was when I told her to keep the cans. I had expected anger, had braced myself for her indignation when I confronted her about the theft, but the twist caught me off guard. Instead, I found a person who was just as lost in the world as I sometimes felt. It occurred to me that maybe what I saw as a desperate act of theft was part of a larger story I didn't know. I recalled her dirty hands, her weathered face, and the sadness that lingered like a shadow. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting on our encounter more often than I'd like to admit. Initially, I tried to justify my actions, clinging to my right to get my property back, convinced that I was in the right. But gradually, my grip on that sense of righteousness loosened. I would drive by the same corner where she had taken the cans, and I began to wonder about her life, who she was outside of that moment. Did she have friends? Was she okay? Occasionally, I'd see others like her, standing on the streets, carrying their circumstances like a heavy load, and I felt an urge to engage, to ask if they were all right. One night, on my way home from a late shift, I stopped at a local diner. It was nothing fancy but had decent burgers and endless coffee. As I was finishing my meal, a woman approached me, an all too familiar look in her eyes. It was her, the woman from the truck. My heart raced. She looked different, more alert, perhaps. I could see the scarring from whatever struggle she was battling, but there was also resilience in her expression. I wasn't sure if she recognized me, but I decided to take the leap. I smiled and said, "Hey, it's you. From the corner. With the cans." She blinked, a flash of recognition crossing her face before she hid it. "Yeah, I remember," she replied, a mix of pride and discomfort in her voice. I could sense the walls she'd built were still towering high. Yet, it didn't end there. We ended up talking for an hour over greasy fries, and I learned more about her circumstances than I anticipated. Her name was Rachel, and she had been struggling for years, trying to make ends meet in a world that kept kicking her when she was down. I shared bits about my life too, my own failures and frustrations, finding common threads of struggle and resilience that bridged the social gap between us. As we shared stories, I began to see humanity in Rachel, and she in me. What started as a moment of conflict turned into a profound connection. I was astonished at how little a person sometimes needs to feel heard. I offered her a few more dollars, insisting it was for a meal, nothing more, and she hesitated but took it. Our exchange felt interwoven with something rich and unspoken, the air humming with unacknowledged understanding. Months later, when I think about that day, I realize it was more than reclaiming my bag of cans or sorting out who was right or wrong. It had spiraled into something beautiful, showing me that sometimes standing your ground means building a bridge instead. I don't always see her, but whenever I do catch a glimpse of her, there's a nod of recognition that passes between us, a silent agreement grounded in empathy. It's strange how kindness can spread like ripples in a pond, starting from a simple act that feels so mundane in the grand scope of life. Little by little, I learned to look beyond possessions, and in doing so, I discovered the true essence of what it means to care for others, and that, perhaps, was the greatest reward of all. I still remember the first time I saw her again after that day by my truck. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind of day that pulls the colors out of the world, making everything look muted and gray. I was walking home from work, my mind tangled in thoughts about the week ahead, meetings that felt pointless and deadlines looming like storm clouds. Just as I turned the corner, I saw her huddled under a bus stop awning, the same worn-out jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. For a moment, I hesitated. Was she still that woman who had taken my bags of cans? I thought about the anger and fear that had welled up in me when I'd confronted her, how I had been ready to yell, ready to proclaim my territory. But now, as I stood there watching her count something in her lap, maybe a few stray coins, maybe hopes for the day, I felt that old tension fade away. Instead of crossing the street to avoid her, I walked closer. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, as if the weight of our previous encounter didn't hang in the air between us. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "I remember you." The way she said it sent a rush of unexpected warmth through me. I caught her eye and nodded. There was no animosity this time, only a shared moment that acknowledged our past. "What are you doing out here?" I asked, the rain drizzling down and inviting us both into a more intimate conversation. "Waiting for a friend," she replied, her voice sounding small yet steady. Not sure what I was thinking, honestly. I glanced at the bus schedule, then back at her. "Want to grab a coffee? There's a little place just down the street." She hesitated, biting her lip, and I could sense her internal struggle. This wasn't the typical interaction you'd have in a city, especially with someone you had a rocky history with. But she did something surprising. She nodded, and that felt like a bridge between us, even if it was fragile. As we settled into a small booth at the cafe, the scent of fresh brewing coffee wrapping around us, I learned her name, Maya. It turned out her world was much darker than I had guessed. She shared stories of losing a job and stumbling into hard times, realities that were stark and raw. I thought about the anger that had bubbled within me when she'd taken what was mine, completely ignorant of what was happening in her world. "Look, I know what I did was wrong," she said quietly, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her finger, "but it wasn't just about the cans. I wasn't thinking straight. I was desperate." Her honesty hit me like a cold splash of water. I had spent most of my adult life pinching pennies, too, and it made me question how I would have reacted in her shoes. "What do you do when the world turns its back?" "I get it," I said slowly. "I really do. But there's no shame in asking for help." That seemed to resonate with her. We talked for hours, two people who had been strangers, now sharing bits and pieces of their lives over steaming mugs. She was funny and insightful, and I started to see the glimmer of hope in her eyes, a light that had been dimmed but wasn't entirely extinguished. By the time we parted ways, that nod I had used to recognize her before became a wave, an acknowledgement that we were both just trying to navigate our way through life's complications. In the months that followed, our encounters became more frequent. Sometimes she'd call if she needed a referral for a job. Other times, I'd see her at the same bus stop, and we'd share quick laughs about life's absurdities. It didn't always lead to deep conversations or outstretching help, but the familiarity felt comforting, a reminder that human connections could blossom from the most unexpected circumstances. Reflecting back on it all, I learned something critical: we all have our battles, our shabby jackets we wear to shield ourselves from the world. But maybe what makes our journeys worthwhile is not just the things we gather along the way, those cans, those ambitions, but the people we meet and the finite moments when we open ourselves to understanding. I never got those bags of cans back, but, honestly, I've come to realize that sometimes what you think you need pales in comparison to understanding someone else's struggle. We both gained something that day we stepped out from behind our defenses, and as I walked home that night feeling lighter, I knew that bridge between us was something I'd treasure far more than any material possession. I still remember the moment it all shifted for us. It was a Friday evening about a year ago when my husband Mark had that accident at work, an industrial mishap that left him with severe injuries and a scattering of medical equipment that now defined our home. I used to think I understood what love and partnership meant, but standing in our living room surrounded by bedside tables laden with an oxygen tank and other gadgets was a stark wake-up call. At first, I poured all of my energy into being his caretaker. I learned to check his machines, set up appointments, and manage medications, all while juggling my job and trying to maintain some semblance of our previous life. But as time blurred the lines between being a partner and a caretaker, I began to feel resentful. I could attribute this weight to many factors: anxiety about his health, the fear of losing the man I loved, and the nagging feeling that my own needs were fading into oblivion. When Mark mentioned that I should take over his daily routines with the equipment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the stress or the fatigue, it was fear of losing myself in this role forever. The argument began softly, a simple question about battery replacements for his nebulizer, and before I knew it, we were shouting. "Why can't you just take care of your equipment like an adult?" I blurted out in anger, each word dripping with frustration and a hint of betrayal. "I didn't sign up for this, Mark. I didn't ask for a second job." The look on his face was heartbreaking, hurt and confusion dancing in his eyes. In that moment, I saw the truth in his silence. I might be pulling away, but he felt more trapped than ever. The emotional distance between us grew palpable, a chasm forged by my unwillingness to shoulder everything. When he finally spoke, his voice wavered. "I didn't want any of this to happen either, but I need you." The words hung between us, heavy with the weight of our unspoken fears. I felt a rush of shame rolling over me at how my vulnerability came across. Was I the villain for wanting to step back or the victim of our circumstances? In the stillness that followed, I knew something had to change in how I handled the situation. I sat by the window later that night, listening to the distant sounds of life moving on outside while our little world felt suffocated by tubes and equipment. I needed to communicate, really communicate, about what I could handle versus where I felt frozen. It took time, but we found a way to talk it through, albeit imperfectly, acknowledging that my refusal wasn't about not wanting to help him but rather about taking care of myself too. So, I set boundaries, and he agreed to look into hiring a home health aide part-time. It was a delicate balance. I still aimed to support him, but I also stepped back enough to breathe. We've learned to navigate this uncharted territory together, even if the scars of that argument linger in the back of my mind. It isn't easy. But love, as it turns out, isn't just about caring for the other person, it's also about caring for oneself in the process. An update? Well, life is still a work in progress. We're still figuring things out, but we're trying to carve moments for just us, no equipment, just conversation, laughter, and the occasional silence that feels comforting rather than suffocating. It's strange how the mundanity of everyday life can intersect with the weight of profound change. Since that argument, I've found myself paying close attention to the little things, like the fresh scent of rosemary wafting from the oven as I cooked his favorite dish, or the way sunlight filtered through the curtains during our rare lazy mornings. I can still feel the tension wrapped around us like an unwelcome shroud, but I also sense the inertia of our relationship shifting, like a ship gradually correcting its course after a storm. One evening, we sat on the couch, the soft glow of the TV providing a backdrop to our quiet moment. I had just poured 2 glasses of wine, the Merlot colored deep as that lingering tension, when he turned to me, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking about how this whole mess with my health has affected us." My heart dropped at the words "affected us" because that phrase had become our elephant in the room. "I don't want our love to feel like a burden to you," he continued, looking down at his hands, the ones that once felt so steady and strong. I could see the uncertainty etched in his brow, the shame that sometimes reared its head when we talked about his illness. "Honestly, it has at times," I responded, trying to keep my tone even, though I could feel the stirrings of something that resembled guilt knotting my stomach. "But it's not just you, you know?" I sighed, searching for the right words. "I felt lost, too, especially when I realize I can't take on everything. I want to support you, but I also need to take care of myself." A silence hung between us, heavy yet necessary, a moment where we were both just being. I thought about all those nights I had spent tiptoeing around his equipment, the sterile tubes and circuits that had invaded our space, feeling like guests in our own home. "I get that," he finally murmured, lifting his gaze to meet mine, a flickering of understanding passing between us. "It makes sense that you'd feel overwhelmed. I do, too. Sometimes, I wish I could just be normal." His admission stung, that longing for normalcy in a life where we had built a new reality marked by appointments and equipment. I reached for his hand, intertwining my fingers with his, letting the warmth travel up my arm. "But we're not normal. Not anymore, and maybe that's okay." Over the next few weeks, we began to talk more openly, not just about his health but about what we wanted for ourselves and each other. We made it a point to have designated unplugged days where we left the medical equipment in the closet and focused solely on each other. We went for walks in the nearby park, shared dinners at our favorite restaurants, and rediscovered our shared love for board games. Each laugh felt like a reminder that we had not lost ourselves to this struggle, even if we were forever changed by it. While the scars of our past arguments still lingered, they transformed into shared reminders of how fragile yet resilient we could be. An update? Life continues to be a roller coaster, but we have learned to embrace the ride together, feeling every rise and fall with newfound appreciation. So yes, we're still navigating our way through this uncharted territory, but now, we do so hand in hand, finding joy in the mundane and strength in each other. And perhaps that sense of acceptance, of our transformed normal, is the truest expression of our love. As days turned into weeks, I found myself reflecting more on what it means to love someone who's facing health challenges while simultaneously learning to advocate for my own needs. I remember one quiet evening, the golden light of sunset spilling through the window, casting a warm glow across our cluttered living room littered with medical gear, the weight of everything settling heavily on my shoulders. It was one of those rare moments when we weren't talking about his health, but just sipping tea and listening to the sound of the kettle cooling down. It struck me that while I had learned to support him, I had also unintentionally built a little fortress around my own needs. I'd made my world so centered on him that I'd lost sight of my own joys. That realization felt like a weight lifting, but also a burden, like I was admitting to myself that I needed more than just being a caretaker. One night, after finishing a long day at work, I mustered the courage to bring it up during dinner. "Can we talk about something?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fluttering in my chest. He looked up from his plate, his fork paused mid-air, concern etched on his face. "Of course. What's on your mind?" The care in his eyes reassured me, urging me forward. "I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore outside of this." I gestured to the various medical items around the table. "I still love you, but some days, just being your caregiver feels like it's consuming me." He nodded, seemingly absorbing my words. "I thought you might be feeling that. I've noticed you've been quieter lately." A softness came over him, a recognition of my struggle that felt validating yet daunting. I took a deep breath, appreciating his understanding rather than defensiveness. "I don't want to be resentful. I want to be better." That's when he surprised me. "You have every right to feel the way you do. We're in this together, but you shouldn't feel like you have to shoulder everything. I mean, when was the last time we had a proper date? Just you and me?" His question lingered in the air, filled with possibilities. And from that simple inquiry, we started to carve out our us time in the chaos. It wasn't easy at first. The weight of that equipment always loomed over us, an uninvited guest in our plans. But we began to reclaim joy in small ways, an old movie marathon on the couch, board games that turned into laughter-filled evenings, and stargazing trips that fostered whispered dreams and sweet nothings. I'd find him in the kitchen trying out a new recipe or curled up with a book, making an effort to fill his own time unconditionally, which helped me to see the parts of him that existed beyond the illness. Still, I won't pretend there were no rough patches. Just last week, he struggled with a particularly tough day, and all my reminders to find joy seemed to slip away like sand through our fingers. I was tired, and the burden of his despair felt heavier than the mechanical equipment we'd come to know so well. I felt anger bubbling again, the situation feeling all too familiar, and I had to remind myself that it was okay to feel frustrated. I didn't want to retreat, but I also didn't want to be overwhelmed. It was during those moments that we both had to remember the tender balance of offering support while keeping our individual selves afloat. As we worked through those days, something shifted profoundly between us. Conversations weren't just about sharing burdens anymore, they became a space for authenticity. We learned that our love had to include vulnerability, not just in our struggles, but also in our triumphs and the mundane comfort of each other's company. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all, that it's okay to wobble and not always have it together, as long as we keep showing up for one another. We're not perfect, nor do we expect to be, but we're navigating with purpose, creating memories woven from resilience, laughter, and a shared commitment to honor our journey. Every step feels like we're writing not just a love story but also the tale of our growth and healing, together. You're never quite prepared for the moment when a friendship you thought was solid begins to crack, like the sudden appearance of a hairline fracture in a beloved piece of pottery. I always thought my best friend, Jessica, and I were inseparable. We met in college, bonding over late-night study sessions and shared cravings for pizza, and over the years, our friendship deepened through heartbreaks and triumphant job hunts. So, when she announced her engagement, I was ecstatic. The proposal story was adorable and included a classic movie moment. He got down on one knee at their favorite park, a sunset painting the sky behind them. But there was a twist, one I didn't see coming. She made a whole bridal party, picking 3 other friends as bridesmaids while leaving me out. My heart sank not just because I was omitted, but because there was no explanation, no discussion. It felt like a silent verdict on our friendship, sudden and devastating. In those first few weeks after her announcement, I threw myself into my job, burying myself in reports and deadlines, but still, her wedding was all anyone could talk about. Soon, it felt like the walls were closing in, everyone's excitement amplifying my hurt. When the invitations were sent out, and I received mine, just as a regular guest, it all hit me again. "Are you going to help me?" she asked one evening, her voice hopeful and bright. She needed help with planning, with organizing details, and with the emotional upheaval that comes with wedding preparations. A million thoughts surged through me, but all I managed was a restrained nod, feigning enthusiasm. Inside, though, a storm raged. I was angry at Jessica for not including me, but even more at myself for being so sensitive. She was still my best friend, right? I wrestled with the decision, tossing and turning at night, replaying our memories, trying to convince myself the exclusion didn't matter. But when I finally made the call, I felt as if I was stepping onto a tightrope. "Jess, I need to be honest," I told her, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't think I can help you with this." The silence that followed felt monumental, like I had just detonated a small bomb in the middle of our relationship. "Why?" she asked, confusion and hurt lacing her voice. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to articulate the ache I'd felt since becoming just a guest. "You didn't make me a bridesmaid. I honestly feel sidelined, like I'm not as important to you as I thought." There was a moment of silence that stretched on eternally. I briefly wondered if I should take it back, maybe promise to help anyway, but I needed her to understand why this hurt. There was probably a good reason, maybe she thought me too busy or too far away. But instead, it felt like rejection, and I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. Jessica's reply was a mixture of shock and disappointment, and in that moment, I saw the big gap forming between us, a chasm of unspoken words. "I didn't mean it like that," she whispered, and I felt the pain in her voice matching my own. "I just didn't think you'd want to." Those were the words that stung. They insinuated that maybe our friendship had been one-sided, or that I had become just a footnote in her new life narrative. Our conversation spiraled into arguments, silence, then tears. We avoided each other for days, walls closing in even more until they felt like a suffocating box. I had to confront my own insecurities. Was I being petty? A part of me wanted to reach out again, to apologize, but I wasn't sure I could stand being in a situation that made me feel so small. Eventually, while I wrestled with my thoughts, I received a text from Jessica. "I'm sorry for everything. Can we talk?" It was an olive branch, but I hesitated, caught between pride and the desperate wish to salvage our friendship. As I prepared for the conversation, I realized this wasn't just about a wedding or the title of bridesmaid. It was about clarity, about understanding our bond and figuring out where we stood now. In my heart, I wanted to believe that even if our friendship looked different, it wouldn't have to vanish. Time would tell where that conversation would lead us, but for now, I felt strangely hopeful that perhaps our friendship could bend without breaking. Life isn't always about titles and roles, sometimes, it's about navigating the gray areas together. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over everything as I watched the shadows stretch across the yard. Wedding preparation was in full swing at Emily's house, her younger sister and some of their closest friends buzzing around like bees. I took a moment to breathe, the sweet scent of blooming flowers blending with the anxiety swirling in my stomach. I'd spent nights imagining what this talk would entail, rehearsing potential angles and arguments in my head, but none of that seemed to matter the moment I stepped into the realm of reality. My best friend, the one I'd laughed with through countless late-night chats, the one I turned to during heartbreaks and victories alike, was standing before me, ideally the happiest bride-to-be. Yet there was a strange awkwardness between us. It felt like a vast canyon separating two cliffs, the old emotions reeling and clashing with the unresolved tension of our situation. "Hey, can we talk for a minute?" I ventured, my voice caught somewhere between a plea and a whisper of uncertainty. Emily turned, her expression shifting from exuberant joy to cautious curiosity. There was a flicker of concern in her brown eyes, but, thankfully, no defensiveness. I watched as she nodded, leading me into a quieter corner of the yard where the sounds of chatter faded to muffled echoes. "Is everything okay?" she asked, a hint of worry creeping into her tone. I hesitated for a moment, searching for the right way to phrase my thoughts. "I just wanted to tell you that I've been feeling really left out since you announced the wedding. I know I wasn't chosen as a bridesmaid, and it stings, honestly. The words spilled from me, raw and unedited. Emily's face fell slightly, as if the wind had been knocked from her sails. I didn't mean to exclude you. It's not that. I had to make some tough choices, and there was so much pressure from family, she replied, tears pooling slightly in her eyes. I hated seeing her upset, yet the frustration bubbled within me. How was it that the planning of her day, a day supposed to bring joy, was also tearing at the fabric of our friendship? We'd always celebrated each other's successes, supporting one another through thick and thin. Emily, it feels like our friendship doesn't hold the same weight anymore. It's like I started retreating into my feelings, knowing I was on the outskirts of such an important moment for you, I confessed, my voice trembling slightly. I tried to explain that it wasn't just the bridesmaid title, it was about being an integral part of her life. It was about feeling seen, feeling valued. I want to be there for you, but I also need to know where I fit in, you know? Emily's expression turned contemplative, a mixture of regret and understanding washing over her. I really didn't think it would feel like that to you. You mean so much to me, and I understand why you'd be hurt, she said, her voice softening. I'm sorry. I want you there, despite the traditional roles and things. We stood in silence for a moment, both reflecting upon the rift and the bridge that was slowly being built. My heart warmed with the possibility that there was more to our relationship than just the traditional norms society imposed on these moments. As we spoke more, apologies were exchanged, emotions fluctuated, tears, laughter, and finally a mutual understanding emerged. We decided I'd help with the wedding, not as a bridesmaid but as a devoted friend with a unique role, pivotal to the day yet without any labels that might diminish how I felt. It was then, in that honest exchange, that I realized friendships may shift and change, but that doesn't mean they have to wither away. There was a newfound desire to reshape our dynamic, and it flickered back to life. Months later, on the day of the wedding itself, as I stood near the entrance watching Emily float down the aisle in her magnificent gown, the butterflies inside my stomach danced not from jealousy, but from pride and a sense of elation. I smiled, not because I was there as a part of the bridal party but because I was celebrating my best friend, the one who had chosen to navigate the complexities of life with me instead of leaving me behind. Sure, the wedding didn't bring the same picturesque fantasy I might have fantasized about, but it illustrated how the love we shared had a way of bending, growing, and adapting through life's unexpected turns. I walked over to her after the ceremony, wrapping my arms around her as she glowed in happiness. Despite our hiccup, we were moving forward. Our bond forged stronger against the backdrop of a wedding, not diminished by any single title. As I pulled away from our embrace, I noticed her eyes glistening, not just from the emotional whirlpool of the day but also with gratitude. You were amazing today, she said, and I couldn't help but smile. It felt like a true acknowledgement, the first step toward healing whatever cracks had formed between us. That moment, wrapped in the warmth of her joy, grounded me, reminding me of all the laughter we'd shared over late-night movies and heartbreaks. We were built on memories, not titles, memories that had survived everything from petty arguments about whose turn it was to pick the restaurant to late-night heart-to-hearts about our wildest dreams. Maybe the role of bridesmaid had taken a backseat, but our friendship deserved recognition of its own, resilient and brimming with history. We stepped into the reception area, the whispers of congratulations. And you look gorgeous. Swirling around us like champagne bubbles. The music pulsed, a contagious beat that made it impossible not to sway a little, despite the awkwardness still nipping at the edges of my mind. I watched as she spun in her dress, her laughter cutting through the noise, and suddenly, I knew I wanted to dive in, to let go of the tension. I grabbed her hand, dragging her toward the dance floor, and we flailed around like two awkward marionettes, laughing as I spun her around, letting the day wash over me. As the night wore on, I took a moment to step outside onto the patio. The stars were twinkling like tiny beacons, and the sounds from inside softened. I pulled my phone out, contemplating the messages flying back and forth with my other friends, all debating whether or not I was right to feel hurt about not being a bridesmaid. Was I supposed to forgive and forget just because I realized that deep down, I craved her happiness more than the recognition? I didn't want to become a subject of petty gossip, but I also didn't want to silence my feelings. I pondered whether I was being irrational. Was I the asshole? I swirled the drink in my hand, suddenly exhausted by the complexity of it all. Then I heard the door creak open behind me. It was her, stepping out into the night, her voice soft and sincere. "Can I join you?" she asked, a hint of vulnerability coloring her tone. I nodded, and we stood side by side, both staring into the dark sky. "Sorry for earlier. I know I messed up not making you a bridesmaid, she started, her words tumbling out like a waterfall of emotions. I felt a knot tighten in my throat. I thought it would be easier, but I see now how it might have hurt you. I turned to face her, wanting to speak but lost in the depth of her gaze. It's okay. I value our friendship so much, I finally managed. It means everything to me. I guess I just felt a little abandoned. There was a pause, a shared silence thick with understanding. I didn't choose you to be my bridesmaid, but I did choose you to be in my life, she said slowly, her voice carrying weight. You're still my best friend, and I'm sorry that title hurt you. You deserve to feel celebrated too. She took my hand in hers, warm and reassuring, and for that brief moment, the cosmic tension began to dissolve. This wasn't just about the wedding, it was about articulation, about redefining what mattered most to us. As we resumed our posts on the patio, reflecting on the evening, I realized this was less about the traditional roles we thought we were supposed to fit into and more about the enduring bond we were crafting, one layered with acceptance and understanding. So, as we walked back inside hand in hand, faces beaming with a quiet joy only we could decipher, the night felt alive, vibrant. Not just from the glittering fairy lights or the cheers erupting from friends but from the rekindled spark of our friendship. We had navigated the gray areas, and life, with all its messiness, was still beautiful. And maybe that's the real celebration. I never thought a water fountain could become a point of contention, but here I am, sitting at my kitchen table, staring out at the little slice of paradise my backyard has become. When I bought my house 4 years ago, it came with an abundance of quirks, most of them charming, but there was this one thing that caught my eye immediately, a dilapidated stone fountain, tucked away beneath a tangle of vines and weeds. At first, it seemed like yet another problem to tackle among the many renovations I had lined up. But as I stripped away the layers of neglect, I found something beautiful beneath, the intricate carvings that wove into the stonework, the delightful gurgle of water once I got it running again. It became the heart of my outdoor space, a sanctuary where I could escape after long days of work. Friends and family loved it, and I cherished the evenings spent sipping wine on my patio, the sound of water filling the air. It was my little oasis, and I wasn't about to let go of it easily. But then my neighbor, Lisa, moved in next door, and that's when everything unraveled. She was nice enough at first, friendly, always waving, but there was something about her demeanor that felt off when she mentioned the fountain. One afternoon, she brought over a plate of cookies and casually asked if I'd ever considered giving the fountain to her. It would really complete my garden, she said, her eyes sparkling with what I could only assume was enthusiasm. I was taken aback, a little incredulous, as I chuckled and politely declined, thinking she was joking. But she wasn't, and from that day forward, her comments turned into subtle hints, and those hints became outright requests. Think about how much better it would look in my yard, she'd say, and I felt a knot in my stomach every time. I was torn. It was just a fountain, after all, but it was my fountain, a part of my home and heart. Each request felt increasingly invasive, as though she was infringing on something very personal to me. I contemplated various ways to approach her, to explain that it wasn't just about the fountain itself, but about the memories it represented, the peace it brought me after some tumultuous times in my life. Then one evening, she blatantly asked me, "Are you really going to hold on to that fountain forever? It's just sitting there gathering dust." Her words felt like a slap. I could feel my anger bubbling up, fueled by her brazen disregard for my feelings. I tried to explain how much it meant to me, how it represented a fresh start after a tough chapter, but she interrupted, insisting, "You can get another one. It's not like you can keep it forever." We exchanged words, and for the first time, I let her see the fierce protectiveness I had for the fountain, my voice trembling as I said, "I don't want to part with it." She rolled her eyes, and I knew then that we were no longer just neighbors, we were adversaries. Days passed where I felt a heavy weight on my chest whenever I spotted her in her yard. I began to feel self-conscious, paranoid even. Would she think about it every time she looked at her garden? Would my unwillingness to part with a piece of stone ruin the neighborhood peace? I couldn't shake the guilt, but I also couldn't give in. That fountain had become a symbol for me, and letting go would feel like surrendering a piece of myself. I eventually confided in a few friends, and to my surprise, they rallied behind me, urging me to stand my ground. Eventually, after much back and forth, I sat down with her one afternoon, my heart pounding, and reiterated my refusal. "You can't just take what isn't yours," I said, and to my shock, she seemed to soften. She admitted that she was frustrated she didn't have a fountain of her own, and in that moment, I actually felt a twinge of empathy. It wasn't just about the fountain for her, it was probably about wanting something beautiful to make her feel at home too. We ended that conversation on a truce of sorts, more respectful but still a little strained. All these months later, I still feel the weight of that moment, of the decision I made, but I also see the value in what I chose. Preserving my sanctuary was about safeguarding my peace. I found solace in the knowledge that home is not just about the physical space, but the emotions tied to it. It's now been a year since that awkward confrontation, and Lisa and I have made an effort to bridge the gap. We wave at each other, and I even invited her over for coffee a few times. I can't say we'll ever be best friends, but at least we're civil. The fountain still bubbles in my yard, a testament to my journey, a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, and a gentle whisper that sometimes, it's okay to take up space and claim what is yours. As I sit on the patio, the sun spilling warm rays over our little backyard oasis, I watch the water fountain sparkle in the late afternoon light. It bubbles softly, sending little ripples across the surface of the birdbath beneath it, where cheerful robins dip in for brief splashes. I still remember the day Lisa had come over out of the blue, her voice shaky as she demanded I give it back, her eyes wide with disbelief at my firm refusal. It's funny how just a year can change so much. Back then, I felt a cocktail of surprise and frustration at her abruptness, but now, there's a sense of calm, almost acceptance, in our relationship. Sure, we weren't chatting about the favorite shade of lipstick or surviving the latest Netflix series over coffee, but a nod and a wave held their own kind of conversation, didn't they? It felt good to reclaim that space, not just in my yard, but in my life. I've learned to appreciate that sometimes, boundaries are not just about lines drawn in the sand, they're about personal growth and understanding what you deserve. You know, the fountain, once an unwanted artifact in our home, morphed into a symbol of resilience. I even caught myself thinking about how Lisa had painted her life in a stark black and white, while mine gradually became a watercolor, soft and blending, colorful and hopeful. One afternoon, after inviting her over for coffee again, I decided to take a chance. As Lisa sipped her latte and glanced curiously at the bubbling fountain, I mentioned how I'd been considering adding some pebbles around the base, maybe even a few plants to create a more inviting atmosphere. She hesitated, her brow furrowing slightly, and I could almost see her weighing her words, like she was taking measured steps into a land that felt unfamiliar. You know, she said cautiously, I always thought that fountain had a wrong place in our neighborhood, but now I see it fits. Her voice trailed off, and a hint of a smile danced on her lips. At that moment, it struck me how layered our emotions had been, how much history nestled beneath the surface of our seemingly mundane interactions. It felt like a truce, a mutual recognition that our choices shaped our spaces, but they didn't have to define us entirely. After that coffee, I found myself reflecting on our lives more deeply. Maybe we were more alike than different, two women figuring out our place in this world, both grappling with our own battles but learning to navigate the complexities of adult relationships. Every time I looked at the fountain, it reminded me of the bubbling emotions we often kept bottled inside, just waiting for a spark to bring them back to life. Season by season, as the fountain continued to flow and thrive, I planted flowers around it, and they blossomed, matching the vibrant changes occurring in my life. They seemed to invite bees and butterflies to our little corner of the world, echoing the beauty of growth and coexistence. Then one afternoon, while arranging a cluster of marigolds around the edge, I noticed Lisa standing by the fence, watching me. Unlike before, her expression was softer, more open. I was just admiring your flowers, she called out, and for a moment, I paused, feeling a thread of connection weave silently through the air. Thanks. Want to help? I blurted out, a mix of unexpected eagerness and genuine hope pouring out. To my surprise, she hopped over without hesitation and spent a couple of hours digging in the dirt, laughter spilling from us in easy waves as we swapped stories about everything from home projects to quirky family traditions. I don't know if that afternoon changed everything, but it certainly shifted the momentum between us. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that preserving space, and fighting for it, can lead to unexpected connections. The fountain, once a source of tension, turned into a centerpiece of friendship, an unlikely bond flowing gracefully through the currents of our lives. And as those blooms opened under the sun, I realized that sometimes, it's not just about claiming what's rightfully yours, but also about sharing the beauty in your life with others, creating something larger than both of you. So here I sit, cup of tea in hand, watching a new chapter unfold, one that flows as effortlessly as the water in that soft, bubbling fountain. The sun hung low in the sky, pooling golden light in my backyard, illuminating the gentle dance of leaves stirred by a light breeze. As I sat with my cup of tea, I couldn't help but think about how much had changed. The fountain, with its rhythmic bubbling, seemed almost alive, gurgling its secrets while I reflected on this past year. Lisa's visits had become frequent, and in a way, they felt like nurturing the roots of a friendship that I hadn't seen coming. Funny how a piece of stone and water could forge a connection between two people who had once viewed each other as enemies. I often marveled at how we would sit on my patio, talking over the sound of that bubbling fountain while the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass. Initially, our conversations danced around pleasantries, but gradually they deepened, sharing stories about our childhoods, our aspirations, and even our fears. I learned that Lisa had spent years feeling like an outsider, displaced from her cherished home that had been sold to its current landlord, and how she often wished she could reclaim even just a small piece of it. That, perhaps, was her own fight for space, one she had focused on before my waterfall had come into the picture. Some days, in the soft glow of twilight, I could sense her longing as she gazed at the fountain, as if it were a bridge to a past she missed. "It really is such a beautiful feature," she would say, her voice low and contemplative. "I remember how it used to be in my parents' yard. Just a small, humble pot with a bit of trickling water, but it sparked so many happy gatherings." Each of her memories wove a thread between us, connecting our experiences in unexpected ways. We grew closer, too, when we would host neighborhood gatherings, allowing others to see our evolving friendship. The fountain stood as a testament to our ability to create something positive from old grudges. I remember the day when the first blush of spring arrived, and we teamed up to organize a small block party. As laughter filled the air and children played by the fountain, I caught a glimpse of Lisa's smile, unrestrained and genuine. It was as though she had set down the burdens of comparison and jealousy. And honestly, I felt lighter too. The bitterness I had once clung to had slipped away, replaced by a sense of shared joy. But like a breeze that turned suddenly, our connection met a momentary pause. One day, Lisa arrived with a different energy about her. There was a weight in her smile, a melancholic shadow behind her eyes. "I may have to move," she said, sitting down at the edge of my patio. The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. After months of building something I thought was strong and lasting, my heart sank. "My job is relocating me. I'm going to have to leave the neighborhood in a few weeks." For a moment, everything felt surreal. I resisted the urge to fold in on myself, to protect my heart from the thought of losing this friendship we had carefully nurtured. "Is there any way to stay?" I blurted out, wishing I could teleport her into staying just a little longer. But she shook her head with a gentle sadness, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I wish. I'll miss our tea times, and I'll miss the fountain in your yard, too." Those words struck me. It was more than just a fountain, it represented our journey together, the growth we nurtured in one another through shared laughter and vulnerability. I realized then that preserving space isn't just a matter of claiming something physical, it's also about creating emotional ties and legacy in our lives. I took a breath and cleared my throat. If you have to move, you have to move. But how about instead of saying goodbye, we make this an adventure? Let's start planning some visits, and I'll send you updates about the fountain, what blossoms, what birds arrive, and who visits. It can be our place still. A smile broke through her somber demeanor, and just like that, our moment of uncertainty transformed. "You promise?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with hope. "I want to hear all the stories." We both laughed, and I could feel the air lightening around us. It was a conversation that echoed what I had learned: while standing your ground is important, allowing yourself the flexibility to share experiences and memories with others can lead to bonds that withstand distance. As the last embers of daylight faded, we sat together in comfortable silence. Each bubble of the fountain seemed to whisper promises of continuity. I stared out at the sparkling water, realizing that this moment, though bittersweet, would not mark the end but rather a new chapter, one that could flow just as effortlessly as the water coursing through our fountain. And as I watched her leave that evening, the warm glow of a blossoming friendship buzzed around me like the remnants of sunlight. Even if space would separate us, the connection we forged would carry on, a reassuring flow that time would not dim. "I don't want to drive with you in the car." Those were the exact words that almost escalated into a full-blown meltdown one Saturday morning as my wife, Liz, and I stood in the kitchen, me absently sipping coffee and her packing the picnic basket for our long-anticipated family outing. Just to clarify, I wasn't saying I didn't want her in my life. It was more about the roller coaster of emotions that driving together managed to bring out in both of us. You know how every couple has their things? Ours seemed to be car rides. Every trip somehow transformed into an arena for argument, highlighting all the petty grievances that usually simmered under the surface. Most days, I didn't mind driving her around, but the last few outings played out like a highlight reel of our little squabbles, her getting anxious over how I drove, me getting irritated with her constant directions. Then came that fateful trip to the farmer's market, where a simple misunderstanding led to a shouting match over directions and somehow spiraled into accusations about who cared more about the event. I remember the tension sitting heavy in the air long after we parked, the bustling sounds around us drowned out by that uncomfortable silence lingering between us. So, one morning during breakfast chatter, she casually asked if I would drive to her sister's house that weekend. My heart sank, and I felt those familiar knots tightening in my stomach. The previous outings had left me drained and worn down, and I just snapped. I wasn't proud of it, my tone might have been sharper than I'd intended, but I couldn't help it. The idea of getting into that car with her again filled me with a sense of dread. I explained my feelings, how every drive felt like a trigger for us both, and any simple disagreement quickly escalated into something bigger. Liz's face fell. I could see betrayal mixed in with confusion, and her disappointment hit me like a punch to the gut. "Am I really that unbearable?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. And in that moment, my frustration twisted into guilt. I loved her, how could I make her feel this way? The air felt thick with unspoken words as I tried to articulate my thoughts. I wanted her to understand why I would rather drop her off at the door and let her go in alone rather than endure another trip marred by tension. But all she saw was a husband unwilling to support his wife with something as simple as driving. It felt like we were caught in this cyclical frustration, and my heart ached contemplating our distance. The car ride that day never happened. Instead, I suggested we take separate cars so we could meet there. She reluctantly agreed, but the grumble of her irked annoyance echoed long after she stormed off to get ready. I kept thinking back to that moment, tossing and turning as I questioned whether I had crossed a line or if this was a necessary boundary for my own mental well-being. Days later, I found myself sifting through various Reddit threads, poring over stories that mirrored our dynamics. Surely, I wasn't the first one with a spouse I struggled to share space with during commutes. I even contemplated posting my own version of AITA for refusing to drive if my wife is in the car. But a part of me hesitated. Deep down, I knew Liz cared, and I didn't want to turn our argument into a public spectacle. As I sat there contemplating, it struck me how foolish it seemed to navigate our lives around this one issue. I decided to approach the subject with her again. Maybe I could suggest a little help from a counselor, a group session to learn how to communicate better in those confined spaces. I prepared for another confrontation, but surprisingly, when I brought it up, her response was a sigh of relief, admitting she also felt the struggle but didn't know how to address it without making it worse. It was a small victory, one that reminded me that love is more than just beating around the bush. It sometimes means having those awkward conversations, even when they make your stomach churn. The road ahead may be bumpy, but I have hope that with a little patience and awareness, we can learn to drive together again, both literally and metaphorically. As the weeks rolled by, that small victory began to ripple into the fabric of our everyday life. We found ourselves seated across from one another more often, each conversation occasionally uncomfortable but always honest. The tension I had imagined would linger started to dissipate into something softer, almost like a mirage that fades as you approach it. Still, every time I slipped into the driver's seat with her beside me, my mind flooded with images of our past drives, moments that felt both intimate and painfully stifling. I remembered that one time we drove to the coast, laughing at how close my car came to the edge of the cliffside. I could still hear her shriek mixed with laughter as I swerved to avoid a pothole. In that memory, I felt a bittersweet ache. Those joyous days had fallen prey to an unspoken strain that was hard to articulate. One evening, while we were watching one of those awful reality shows, where people threw drinks at one another over petty arguments, I snuck a glance at her from the corner of my eye. She looked so content, yet a hint of melancholy rested in her gaze. This time I took the plunge. "Do you think we can go on a drive soon?" I asked, somewhat hesitantly. I was greeted with a skeptical arch of her eyebrow, and my heart raced in response. I rushed to clarify, "I mean a short one. Just to the park, with windows down, no destination." She paused, chewing on her lip before nodding slowly, but I could tell there were layers beneath that simple gesture. I could sense that she was weighing her answer against the awkwardness we had been navigating. "Okay, but we have to promise to communicate this time. No silent treatment, all right?" "Deal," I said, relief washing over me. When the day came, sunny and promising, I found myself standing outside the car for what felt like an eternity. She sidled up to me, and for a flicker of a moment, anxiety gnawed at the edges of my excitement. Had we really untangled the threads? Would it snap back to the old ways once we hit the road? With a deep breath, I opened the door for her, trying to fit that old romantic script despite our recent battles. As we drove, my nerves had a friend in the cool breeze flowing through the open windows. I dared to give a sideways glance at her, and to my surprise, she was smiling, a look I hadn't seen in what felt like eons. "I think I actually missed this," she said lightly. The casualness of her voice struck me, wrapping around me like a cozy blanket. There were a few quiet moments where I could feel the air between us change, morphing into something more comfortable than before. Halfway to the park, she turned to me with earnest curiosity and asked, "What was it that made you refuse to drive with me before?" The question hung in the air like a low-hanging mist. I felt trapped, I guess. It'd start as just us driving, and then I'd feel like our conversations were running out of gas. I often felt like I had to suppress my thoughts just to keep things smooth. Like we were always dodging potholes while ignoring the road ahead. She nodded, absorbing my words. That's exactly how I felt too. I was afraid to steer us into any territory that might end up with us arguing in the car, and it made me anxious. I didn't want to face that tension when it was just supposed to be a simple drive. "Why did we let it come to that?" I asked, almost more to myself than her, but she answered, her voice softer now. "Because trying to keep things perfect put pressure on us. We let the unease grow like weeds in a garden." Suddenly, I felt a weight lift, and the path ahead didn't seem so wound up in knots. This drive was no longer steeped in fear, but in reflections of moments we both cherished, nestled in between the unspoken worries. The park was just ahead when she reached for my hand, and I turned to see her looking at me with an openness I hadn't realized I was yearning for. "Let's not keep dodging the bumps anymore," she said, squeezing my hand. "Yeah, let's just drive," I replied, and as we turned into the park, I felt a resurgence of hope fill the cabin. The journey together was far from over, but it felt worth taking. We parked under an oak tree, the sunlight dancing through the branches, flickering between our faces as we looked at each other, perhaps for the first time in a long while, not just as partners sharing the road but as companions rediscovering each other, leaning into the uncertainty with a hopeful spirit. In the weeks that followed, we traded drives for hikes, park picnics, and late-night talks in our living room. Each outing became an act of reclaiming what had been lost, weaving in and out of nurturing our bond. And occasionally, our conversations would dive deep into the past where unspoken grievances lived, and we would laugh at the absurdity of how it took a struggle to glide us back into the comfort of companionship. I think hindsight can sometimes be more liberating than we give it credit for. We may still have our moments of shaky ground ahead, but for now, I know we'd learned something invaluable, the beauty of simply sharing the ride, bumps and all. I found myself smiling more as the days stretched into weeks, the sunlight filtering through our kitchen window in the morning, illuminating the promise of a new day. It felt strange, almost surreal, how conversations that once felt like precarious tightropes transformed into bridges connecting our hearts. One Saturday morning, as we were preparing breakfast, I caught her humming softly to the tune of an old song that echoed through the house. I couldn't help but join in with a slightly off-key harmony, and we both laughed at my attempt. In that moment, it was as if a weight had lifted, and the air between us crackled with a vibrant energy I hadn't felt in a long time. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still remnants of that tension whenever we approached the car. I remember the day we decided to take a drive together to visit the farmer's market, a small outing that was supposed to be relaxing. As I turned the ignition, the engine's growl filled the air, and an unspoken apprehension crawled back into my gut. I caught a brief flicker in her eyes, a hesitant glance towards the dashboard, as if she feared that the journey we were about to take would steer us off course again. I took a deep breath, recalling all the progress we had made, and turned to her. "Ready?" I asked, hoping my voice conveyed more confidence than I felt. She nodded, but I could see the edges of her lips twitching slightly, betraying the unease beneath her composed facade. As we merged onto the road, I felt the familiar squeeze of tension in my chest. The world outside zipped by, green trees blurring into a colorful tapestry, yet it felt like we were suspended in a moment that could tip either way. Halfway through, while we waited at a red light, I started talking about the summer plans, the vacation we had dreamed about, and how excited I was to explore new places with her. Slowly, she unwound, sharing snippets of her thoughts, her laughter beginning to spill into the cabin, easing the weight of past shadows. It was like oil on troubled waters, our rhythm returned, the easy banter making the ride feel less like a challenge and more like an adventure. Yet, it was only when we parked in the lot, surrounded by laughter and the sweet scent of fresh produce, that it hit me. These outings were not just about conquering our fears but weaving a tapestry of memories, day by day, thread by thread. I watched as she slid out of the car, her face lighting up with joy at the sight of the market stalls. I realized then that this was what it meant to truly reconnect, to embrace the small moments, to not just share the driving but also the laughter that flourished in the little things. As we wandered, hand in hand, between bright displays of fruits and flowers, I felt that perhaps the real treasure was not in trying to eradicate the past but in learning how to navigate it together, combining our strengths. Even moments of silence held a new promise. We had learned to be present with each other, to sit with the stillness without letting it navigate our emotions. Months later, I found myself reflecting, our dynamic had transformed in ways I hadn't expected. Occasionally, we still stumbled into those old patterns, where one of us would retreat or slip into silence, but now we approached those moments with awareness. I'd suggest we take a drive to unwind, ensuring we'd set the tone early, sometimes with a silly playlist or a game to keep the atmosphere buoyant. Each journey felt like a rediscovery, a chance to create new memories that overshadow the shadows of our past. Life isn't always perfect, and maybe it's in the flaws where our story truly breathes, vibrant and imperfectly beautiful. I still don't know what the future holds. Maybe more bumps, more lessons, or perhaps a serenity we haven't yet touched. But as I navigated through this winding road of life with her by my side, I found solace in the thought that we were learning together. And that in itself was worth every hesitant mile we'd face together. I never thought that my home-cooked meals would become a point of contention, especially when it came to my boyfriend's kids. When I first met Jake, he mentioned he had 2 children, and I braced myself for the whirlwind that would follow. But I didn't expect to fall in love with their chaotic energy. They were just 10 and 14, and while I found their quirks endearing, I was constantly reminded that they were also master negotiators, especially when it came to mealtime. It all came to a head one Sunday evening when I decided to whip up a hearty vegetable stir-fry. I'd spent a good 2 hours chopping veggies, prepping rice, and stirring in a homemade sauce, humming happily to my playlist as I filled the kitchen with mouth-watering aromas. When I set the table, I felt a sense of pride. Jake's kids, however, traipsed in and paused as if I had served them something alive. "What's that?" The younger one, Lily, wrinkled her nose. "Ew, I'm not eating that." The older one, Ben, joined in. "Yeah, can we just order pizza instead?" My heart sank. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this was a new family dynamic, and kids have a knack for testing boundaries. "Guys, I really put a lot of effort into this, and it's what's for dinner. You can eat it, or if you're not hungry, that's okay too." My voice was calm, but internally, I wrestled with a potential backlash. There was a powerful silence, thick with disbelief. I felt the stakes rise as they exchanged glances, confusion and defiance dancing in their eyes. "But it's gross," Lily protested, sinking into her chair with arms crossed. Anger flared up in me. Was I supposed to cater to their every whim? I felt a wave of frustration as their protests grew louder, but I forced myself to stay grounded. "Look," I said, trying to keep my tone steady, "I get that it's not your favorite, but you're old enough to try new things. How about just one bite? You can always have dessert afterward." The quiet stretched. I was ready to crack if they kept it up. The moment felt critical, like a lit fuse that could either fizzle out or explode. Finally, Jake stepped in, looking concerned as Ben and Lily glared at me. "Hey, lifelong battle with vegetables aside, can we at least try to support each other?" he said, trying to lighten the moment. With dramatic sighs that could shatter glass, they slid their forks into the stir-fry, which I must admit looked inviting enough. As they reluctantly chewed, I could see them grimace, but something unexpected happened next. Ben declared it almost edible, while Lily muttered that she could tolerate it if it meant dessert. We ended on a humorous note, and as the dinner progressed, I found myself laughing alongside them, the earlier tension dissipating. However, the aftermath gnawed at me. Had I overstepped a boundary? Was I that tyrannical figure in their lives that made mealtimes a game of compliance? Later, after I tucked the kids in, Jake brought up our earlier standoff gently. His hand warming my back. "I think you handled it well for a first time," he said. "It takes time for them to accept a new routine, you know?" I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Although I felt uncertain, a part of me appreciated that I stood my ground in an unfamiliar parenting territory. Sometimes cooking for a family is more than putting food on the table, It's about navigating new personalities and expectations. If I ever end up becoming a real part of their lives, I would need to find that balance between discipline, understanding, and letting them choose their battles. I'd like to think I'm on the right track. I might even try another stir-fry next week, but not without a little prep work and maybe a fun cooking session with them beforehand. I'd want them on board, not just as a meal plan but as part of this crazy family journey we were on together. As I sat at the kitchen table, the remnants of last night's stir-fry still lingering in my mind, I couldn't shake off the feeling of uncertainty about how to move forward. The whole idea of being with someone who had kids was both exhilarating and daunting. I tried to visualize family meals as these blissful moments, laughter ricocheting off the walls, but in reality, I had clashed with Chris's kids over food more often than I'd care to admit. 11-year-old Ava had her heart set on pizza, the classic kid's choice, while her younger brother, Max, preferred nothing but chicken nuggets. And so, standing at the stove last night, chopping broccoli and bell peppers, I felt my resolve wane. Eat what's for dinner or don't eat at all, I'd said, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders like a heavy blanket. The words had slipped from my mouth before I could catch them, a hardline stance that resonated into the silence of the kitchen, slicing through any chance of warmth. I understood it was unrealistic to expect them to embrace my culinary enthusiasm overnight. I thought about it long after dinner, my stomach heavy with the green beans I'd forced myself to eat, and I just couldn't shake that gnawing regret. Had I been too harsh? I would define my approach as teaching them to appreciate food, but in what way had I truly connected with them? After they had left the table, I contemplated the gap that had formed. Chris had tried to mitigate the situation, reassuring them and promising pizza tomorrow while sending me a poignant look, part apology and part "what were you thinking?" I understood he was in a tricky position, caught between his partner and his kids. That moment of clash weighed heavily, not just in the context of dinner but in the greater effort of blending our lives. I loved Chris, and I could see why this family meant the world to him, but after our first big rocky dinner together, I felt more like a bumbling intruder than a partner. The truth nagged at me, I craved connection, not confrontation. The shimmering vision of us coming together over a shared meal felt threatened by my own missteps. Were my expectations too high? I could sense my friends' voices echoing in my mind, suggesting a more lenient path, one that allowed kids to express their preferences without feeling bullied by adult tastes. I mulled over the idea of a pre-dinner meeting, a vote, perhaps? Pizza, stir-fry, or even tacos? I could picture the kids researching together, scrolling through recipes, maybe even sharing their wild ideas with me while chuckling over imagined concoctions. The next day, as the sun peeked through the kitchen window and spilled onto the counter, I took a deep breath and texted Chris. Can we set a family dinner meeting tonight? I think it could be fun. Just the kids and us, no pressure. To my relief, he responded almost immediately. Sure. I think they'll love it. I felt hope flutter within me as we assembled that evening around the kitchen table, the atmosphere different already, with art supplies scattered across one side as a backdrop to our conversation. Okay, team, before we plan our dinner, how was your day? I asked, trying to start light. Max was engrossed in his drawing, which was surprisingly good, while Ava had found a way to channel her impatience into a few clever comments about vegetables being growing food. We talked and laughed, and slowly I noticed a change in our dynamics. When I suggested we had to make a plan for the week, they didn't immediately groan. Instead, Ava perked up, saying, "Can we have taco night? We can make them." And just like that, the children were engaged. They reveled in the idea of crafting their own tacos, discussing toppings, and experimenting with what they'd like to adorn this new creation. I felt a warmth bloom in my chest, that elusive sensation of family forming the way broth warms soup. I took a step back and decided to let them lead. After all, cooking was a journey, not a destination. Dinner rolled around the next week, and together we peeled avocados, shredded cheese, and dashed spices back and forth like our own culinary dance, the kitchen buzzing with chatter and laughter. Chris must have felt the shift too, because his smile spanned ear to ear as he watched the three of us concoct our masterpieces. That night, not only did we eat together, but we also forged a deeper sense of understanding. As I watched Max carefully pile his toppings, his face a mix of concentration and delight, I realized this was more than just about making meals. This was about making memories, bridging experiences, and, hopefully, inviting them into my world just as they welcomed me into theirs. A week later, while we all sat on the couch, the remnants of dinner still wafting through the air, Ava turned to me and asked shyly, "Can we try that stir-fry again next week?" I chuckled, knowing she had probably come to accept that sometimes we have to eat things we might not prefer. Absolutely, if we can do it together, I replied, feeling a soothing sense of victory wash over me. As I leaned back and heard their laughter fill the room, I finally recognized the beauty in our shared chaos, a family finding its rhythm, with all its flavors, challenges, and laughter. The journey ahead, filled with learning and experimenting, felt like the perfect adventure. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed a threshold together, from mere coexistence into a budding family dynamic that was starting to feel genuine. Each evening, the dinner table became more than just a place to eat, it transformed into a communal hub of laughter, arguments over whether to have chicken nuggets or homemade tacos, and surprisingly deep conversations about their day. I found myself cherishing the little moments, the way Oliver would scrunch his face at broccoli but listen while I told him about how important it was for his growing body, or the way Ava started to try new foods, albeit slowly, but it felt like small victories on this journey of culinary diplomacy. One particular Saturday, we took my idea of a cooking session and made it a whole event. I took them to the local market, and it was incredible to see their eyes light up at the array of colors, bright red tomatoes, vibrant orange peppers, and greens that looked like they belonged in a painting. The way they picked out their favorite ingredients to create our next family meal made me feel like we were all inches closer to blending our lives. The joy wasn't just in the act of cooking, it was in each tiny choice they made, how their personalities shone through. As we prepped dinner that night, laughter echoed along with the clattering of pots and pans. There was flour everywhere. Ava had managed to get some on her nose, and even Oliver, who had once been wholly indifferent toward helping, had a spatula in hand, flipping pancakes with a kind of determination that made me proud. I wanted to capture that moment forever, the three of us dancing around the kitchen like we owned the place. As we sat down together with plates filled with pancakes drizzled with syrup and fresh fruit, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. My heart felt full. Yet, amidst the laughter and antics, something did gnaw at me. I was reminded of that initial conflict. Should I have been firmer with my expectations? It danced in the back of my mind like an uninvited guest. I recalled the times I made comments about their choices or pushed them to embrace something they initially refused. I wondered if I was setting them up for failure in adapting to a household that didn't bend to their every whim. I let it linger in my thoughts, willing to explore the line between being a nurturer and a figure of authority. But every smile from them, every bit of that sincere joy we created together felt like an affirming hug around my doubts. That upcoming week, we tried the stir-fry together. They didn't just help, they took ownership. Ava insisted on chopping the vegetables, creating little shapes out of the bell peppers like they were pieces of art, and Oliver surprised us all by deciding he wanted his pieces a bit bigger because, in his words, everything tastes better in massive bites. Watching them engage in our meal with excitement and investment settled something deep within me, the realization that as challenging as it might be to find the right balance, it was also utterly rewarding. I felt like I was gaining not just their trust, but a glimpse into how our little family was beginning to develop our rhythm, a rhythm that celebrated our mismatched notes as much as the harmonies we found along the way. Fast forward to a sunny Sunday a few weeks later, and I found myself standing in our kitchen, a vibrant smell wafting through the air as we prepared an extravagant dinner meant to celebrate the end of the week. After weeks of navigating some bumps and missteps, the kids still had their moments of pushback, but I had noticed they were beginning to voice their preferences more constructively. As I was stirring a pot, Ava casually shared how she appreciated being listened to during our cooking sessions. Oliver chimed in that he liked knowing he could suggest things without judgment. It hit me harder than I expected. Here, amidst the flour and chopping boards, we were building something real. Reflecting on it later that night, I realized I had been questioning myself an awful lot. What age do you cross from merely being a parent figure to someone they could genuinely trust? The love I felt for those two kids grew each day, and the connection we forged deepened beautifully. Maybe, just maybe, family really is about creating a safe space, where all the flavors are welcome, where every spice has its purpose. I laid in bed that night, the remnants of laughter still echoing in my mind and warmth radiating from my heart, and for the first time, I believed we were truly becoming what I had always imagined we'd be, a family. When I first stepped into Matt's house, the air was thick with memories, his collection of vinyl records lining the walls, a half-finished puzzle sitting on the dining table, and that unmistakable scent of sandalwood from the candles he loved to burn. We had shared this space for less than a year before tragedy struck. I still remember the call like it was yesterday, the way my heart sank when his sister's voice trembled through the line, telling me he was gone. Just like that, at 33, He left this world in a car accident, leaving me to navigate the wreckage of grief while still trying to honor the life we built together. It didn't take long for his parents to come knocking. They were polite but firm, suggesting that the house should return to them now that Matt was gone. "It's family property," they said, glossing over the emotional tapestry woven in every corner. "He wouldn't have wanted you burdened with it." I remember standing in the living room, feeling like an intruder in my own life. Their voices grew louder, demanding a surrender I wasn't ready to make. Thoughts swirled inside my head. Was I being selfish for wanting to keep the place that had become a part of me? Matt had always said home was where you felt safe, and this was my sanctuary, my last connection to him. But how could I deny his parents their grief? The guilt of wanting to hold onto this space while knowing they were mourning their son weighed heavily on my conscience. After all, they'd raised him, loved him longer than I ever had. I spent sleepless nights pacing through the rooms, retracing footsteps, every laughter-filled evening, every quiet morning spent in the kitchen with the sunlight spilling in like honey. Slowly, I realized that giving up the house felt like giving up Matt, as if I would be erasing a part of our story. I turned to friends for advice, and they all had differing opinions. Some painted me as the villain, others told me that I had every right to keep the place that held my memories. With their conflicting perspectives echoing in my head, I felt even more paralyzed. Who was I in all of this? After a few weeks, I agreed to meet with his parents, hoping for a solution. They arrived, looking weary and fragile, the lines of grief etched deeper in their faces, and we sat at his dining table, the same one where we'd shared countless meals. What started as an organized discussion devolved into tears, accusations, and desperate pleas. "This is our family home," they argued, while I felt my heart shatter, wondering if I was somehow the villain of this story. Each day brought fresh unease, and I complicated the matter by starting to dream of selling the house instead, a solution that felt easier, a way to turn our shared life into something tangible, something that could finally support me instead of haunt me. But would it be a betrayal? A few days after that confrontation, tangled in thoughts and half-formed plans, I found myself sitting on his old couch. Wrapped in his blanket, scrolling through my phone aimlessly. I stumbled upon a support forum where stories of similar heartbreak were shared, and as I read, I felt a wave of understanding wash over me. The threads resonated with tales of loss, love, and rebirth. It struck me that sometimes, betrayal comes not from holding on but from losing the courage to be honest. I penned a heartfelt letter to Matt's parents, pouring out my feelings and fears, explaining my desire to cherish his memory by keeping the house. I confessed that I didn't want to erase his existence. It felt sacrilegious to me. Weeks passed, and after what felt like an eternity, they finally responded. In their reply, surprisingly gentle and understanding, they acknowledged my pain and agreed to a shared arrangement, allowing me to stay while also ensuring they could visit whenever they pleased. It was a relief, a patchwork solution that somehow felt right. I could take my time to heal, and in turn, they could reconnect with the son they had lost. Days turned to weeks as I settled into the fractured routine of grief and healing, small moments of joy seeping into my days. The last time I lit one of Matt's favorite candles, I didn't cry but smiled, remembering his laugh as it filled the room. Sure, the journey was still messy, and the scars of loss wouldn't fade quickly, but I had found a way to carry his memory forward, still not entirely sure whether I was the asshole, but at least I was no longer alone in my decision. Life, I learned, is not simple, and sometimes, dwelling in the gray is precisely where we find our way back to the light. It's funny how life has a way of tying everything up in knots before it unwinds just when you think you're at the end of your rope. After letting go of the weight of being the asshole back then, I immersed myself in the remembrance of Matt, letting those moments pull me toward healing. I decorate the small apartment we had together with things that reminded me of him, a collection of books he loved, a few of his favorite band posters that I regretfully took down but now hung again in proud defiance of how much I cherished those years together. It felt like a tribute to our time, despite the oft-discussed future that we'd never get to have. But there was still that looming question of Matt's house, the place where we shared both laughter and deep, loving conversations, and it weighed heavily on my mind after his parents reached out again. I remember exactly where I was when his mother called. I had been curled up on the couch, wrapped in a quilt that Matt had snagged from a thrift store because he loved the colors, bright orange patches that felt like the sun. Her voice was steady but trembled with an undercurrent of sadness as she filled me in on the details I'd already processed but hadn't fully faced. They wanted to discuss the house. It was a direct route back to the thoughts I tried to bury, that sense of obligation to return it to his family, to honor his memory alongside theirs, but it was also the thought of giving up a piece of my heart that kept me from saying yes. I had worried out loud to my friend Hannah about what this might mean. Would I be betraying our love? Would I be turning my back on the countless memories that literally echoed in those walls? Hannah had listened patiently over coffee, her blonde curls bouncing as she furrowed her brow. "You're not abandoning anything," she assured me, sipping her steaming latte. "You're just considering what Matty would have wanted." But the truth was, I didn't know what he would have wanted. We had never discussed what would happen if things went sideways. In my heart, I knew that building a life together in that space was an extension of our relationship, and I didn't want to relinquish it to the sharp edges of grief my memories sometimes morphed into. Days turned into weeks, each one brimming with contemplation. I thought of the countless summer nights we spent on the back porch, nursing our drinks, our dreams feeling limitless under a blanket of stars. But then, conflicting feelings began swirling in my mind. His parents deserved their piece of him too, he was their son after all. So there I was, caught in that relentless tide of internal debate, pacing the hardwood floor that hid the scuffs he had created by shuffling his feet, overthinking it, losing sleep while part of me fought against part of me while the other part stayed quiet, all in tandem. Eventually, in a moment steeped in courage derived from deep love, I called Matt's parents. My stomach flipped as I dialed their number. I could hear the hesitation in their voices when I explained how much I wanted to keep the house, thanking them for understanding even as they expressed disappointment. But to my surprise, they didn't lash out. They were gracious, even supportive, managing to communicate the essential truth, that love doesn't adhere to walls. It flows freely, molding the space within. They didn't ask for more, they just wanted to know I was okay, and somewhere in that conversation, I realized I was finally stepping into my own life, one part grieving and another part moving forward. A few months later, I found myself back at that house one bright Saturday morning, nostalgia flooding in as I prepared to host a small gathering for a few friends. As I laid out snacks and popped the cork on a bottle of wine, thoughts of Matt slipped in like a gentle breeze. I could almost hear him making jokes in the background, a playful reminder of how he used to turn even the most mundane moments into laughter. I stepped outside, leaning against the porch rail, watching the sunlight dance in the leaves overhead. A soft touch brushed the back of my mind, a whisper of reassurance that I was on the right path. By finally carving out my own space, I remembered us while allowing that to be an open door for new laughter, new memories, still honoring the love we had built. I might never fully know if I was right or wrong in my choice, but I finally felt on solid ground, free from the burden of guilt that had been my constant companion. The house was just the beginning. It wasn't the anchor that tied me to his memory but rather a vessel to traverse new journeys. As the laughter filled the air that evening, it dawned on me, the ghosts of our past can coexist beautifully, quietly guiding us, as long as we remember to live for the moments yet to come. Sitting in the midst of friends, I realized it was a world I hadn't fully immersed myself in until now. The chatter around the room was a comforting hum, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of glasses. I watched as Jenna, one of our closest friends, picked up the guitar Matt used to play. She strummed a few chords, glancing at me with that lopsided grin. "We should all sing one of Matt's favorites," she suggested. My heart flickered, half in joy and half in trepidation. It felt like an intrusion into my sacred memories, the kind you protect fiercely yet crave to share. But I nodded, the warmth of camaraderie coaxing me to lean into it. As the first notes of "Hey There Delilah" filled the room, I felt an unsettling twinge. It was his song, one that resonated with our long-distance relationship when he traveled for work, me lying on the couch listening to him through blurry phone lines. I closed my eyes for a moment, allowing the music to wrap around me like a gentle embrace. Instead of sorrow flooding my senses, I found fragments of joy rising within me, memories flashing like starlight. By the time Jenna finished the song, I was smiling, knee-deep in nostalgia yet buoyed by the laughter echoing around me. I looked around, and my friends were there, sharing in the moment, each of them carrying their own piece of Matt with them. Emily, with her wild spirit, was mixing cocktails in the kitchen, trying to recreate his infamous mojito. "Totally nailed it or totally failed it," she joked, and we erupted in laughter again. Yet, even amidst the warmth, I felt the shadows whispering uncertainty in my ear. The house, Matt's sanctuary, lingered at the edge of my mind. I was still torn over his parents' insistence on wanting it, the home that cradled our laughs and sheltered our dreams now looming as a point of contention. I recalled their faces, the raw pain in their eyes during the memorial, how they clung to relics of their son's life, each item a tangible piece of his existence. The texts continued, gently nudging at me, calling for decisions I hadn't yet made. That night, I slipped out to the balcony, the cool air prickling my skin. I leaned against the railing, staring at the stars, which felt so far away yet impossibly close. Did holding on to the house mean letting go or holding tight? There was a truth to letting it go that felt almost liberating, a part of me that knew Matt would want me to make memories in a space that reflected the life I was building. But there was another part. Brittle and fearful, that worried letting go would mean losing him all over again. I scolded myself for these thoughts. It felt selfish to cling to a home when his parents were grieving in a way I might never fully grasp. After my friends left, I found myself wandering through the rooms, each space heavy with love and loss. I ran my fingers across the walls, the place filled with echoes of laughter, late-night talks, and raw vulnerability. This wasn't merely wood and nails, it was where I had grown as a person and where Matt and I had spun dreams together. It felt sacred. Eventually, I settled on the couch, wrapping a blanket tightly around me, half seeking comfort and half searching for clarity. In the moments that followed, I found myself reaching for my phone, not to text the parents, but to type out my thoughts. I contemplated how the house could be a kind of bridge, a way to honor Matt's legacy by hosting friends and writing and illuminating his memories. As I typed, it became clear, I didn't have to choose between keeping it and giving it away. Rather, what I truly needed was to transform it. A new purpose emerged from the grief. It could serve as a community space, a haven where Matt's spirit could linger in laughter and shared experiences. Finally, with a steady breath, I hit send on a message to his parents. I invited them to visit, expressing that while I understood their desire for the house, I envisioned a shared future where the space could be dedicated to honoring a life well lived. I knew they might not understand, and my heart raced at the thought of their reaction. My fingers trembled as I set my phone down, each heartbeat resounding in anticipation. I might still be navigating uncertainty, but perhaps, just maybe, I'd found a way through the haze. The stars twinkled above as I finally closed my eyes, letting the hum of memories blend seamlessly with the promise of new beginnings, holding tightly to the idea that love doesn't diminish, it can evolve, just as we do. I never imagined that losing weight would lead to me being in the middle of a workplace drama, but here I am, sharing my story, hoping to find some clarity. Just a few months ago, I was sitting in an office cubicle, feeling overwhelmed and self-conscious, my body holding onto extra pounds that I had come to accept as part of me. But after a serious health scare, I decided to get serious about my fitness. I spent countless hours in the gym, swapped fast food for salads, and traded late-night Netflix binges for evening runs. Gradually, the scales tipped in my favor, and before I knew it, I had shed nearly 30 pounds. With my newfound confidence, I felt ready to take on the world, or at least my job at the marketing agency. As my clothes started to feel comically oversized, I figured I could do something nice with them. Enter Jenna, one of my coworkers who had been struggling with her own weight issues. We had shared a few conversations where she spoke about her desire to lose weight but was struggling to find motivation. One afternoon, as we sipped our afternoon coffees, I jokingly offered her some of my old clothes, their vibrant colors ready to be appreciated by someone who needed a confidence boost. Her initial reaction was laughter, and she brushed off the idea, but I could see a flicker of interest in her eyes. It felt good to offer her a lifeline, a way to feel better about herself without the financial burden of new clothes. However, I didn't anticipate the controversy it would stir. The next day, I approached her again, this time presenting a neatly folded pile of blouses and blazers from my closet. "I really think you'd look great in these," I said, feeling a bit sheepish but genuinely hoping to help. But then, her face fell. "I appreciate the thought, but I really don't want your hand-me-downs," she replied, her voice tight. I felt my heart sink. I was only trying to be helpful. But Jenna's discomfort didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I started to notice a shift in our interactions. She became distant, not just with me but with the whole team, as if the mere act of my offering had changed the energy in the room. I found myself questioning everything. Did I overstep? Was I the insensitive jerk that some pieces of the office gossip suggested? I thought things were innocent enough. I only wanted to share some clothes that I wasn't using. Days turned into weeks, and all our mutual acquaintances began commenting, whispering about my offer that had supposedly hurt Jenna's feelings. Each time I heard someone mention it, I felt a sting of regret, swirling like a storm in my gut. I wanted to reach out again, to clarify and apologize, but whenever I saw her in the break room, my heart raced, and I clamped my mouth shut. I worried about being seen as the villain instead of the supportive coworker I aimed to be. My stomach ached, and I felt all the confidence I had gained slowly begin to slip away. Finally, after a particularly tough Week where the tension was palpable in the air, I decided enough was enough. I needed closure, not for my sake but for Jenna's too. I invited her for coffee, just the two of us. I took a deep breath, my heart drumming loudly as I sat across from her. Jenna, I'm genuinely sorry if I crossed a line. I only wanted to help. She looked at me with this mixture of sadness and frustration, and for a moment, silence filled the space between us. Then she spoke, softer than I expected. It's just. I've been struggling, you know? And being offered clothes when I already feel like a failure? It felt like I was being given a reminder of everything I didn't achieve. As those words sank in, I realized that my intentions, no matter how good, had missed the mark entirely. After our talk, a weight lifted, and I could see the flicker of understanding in her eyes. We hadn't solved anything major that day, but we were able to at least acknowledge the issues around our insecurities and how they intertwined with our friendship. I promised myself to be more careful moving forward, knowing that sometimes, a helping hand can accidentally feel like a shove. As I walked back to my desk, a thought struck me: maybe we can't fix everything, but we can be honest about our feelings. I hoped this wasn't the end for Jenna and me but instead the beginning of a more genuine connection. A few weeks later, while cleaning out my closet again, I thought of her. I held onto those clothes but not out of guilt or as a reminder of my past, but as a nod to the complicated yet beautiful ways our paths crossed, forever reminding me to tread more gently in such delicate situations. The thoughts of Jenna lingered in my mind like the lingering scent of fading perfume, the good kind, the kind that brings back warmth rather than sadness. I spent the next few weeks navigating the delicate balance of our workplace dynamic. Each time I caught a glimpse of her, I felt a tug in my chest. She was becoming more than just a coworker, she was a reminder of empathy and understanding, the raw connection that can emerge from vulnerability. I remember one afternoon, I noticed Jenna in the break room, her shoulders slumped slightly as she stirred her coffee, lost in thought. I hesitated at the entrance, unsure if I should join her or give her space. But something nudged me forward, a quiet urge to ask, so I did. "Hey, you okay?" I ventured, my voice softer than I intended, slightly tinged with concern. Jenna looked up, surprise flickering across her face before she managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just tired, you know?" she replied, but I could see the walls still standing. Instead of prying, I settled into a nearby chair, and we exchanged small talk, laughing about mundane things, each joke momentarily peeling back layers of her guarded demeanor. It felt good, like we were slowly weaving a new tapestry of friendship, a new bond built on honesty rather than the remnants of misunderstanding. Then one evening, as I sat on my bed staring at the growing mountain of clothes I had set aside for donation, a sudden urge overcame me. Maybe, just maybe, I could offer some of them to Jenna. I gathered a few pieces that I thought would suit her style, things I had loved, but now felt like remnants of someone else's life. I imagined her face lighting up as she tried them on, the tentative joy mirrored in her appreciative smile. But the moment I sealed that bag, doubt snuck in like a cold breeze through an open window. What if she took it the wrong way? What if it reminded her of her own struggles with weight and self-acceptance? The very last thing I wanted was for her to feel any sense of embarrassment or inadequacy. Still, I made a decision. I wouldn't let fear steer me clear of taking a chance to show kindness. The next day at work, I approached her after a meeting, heart racing as I felt the weight of the garment bag in my hands. "Hey, Jenna, do you have a minute?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked curious but cautious, and as I revealed the bag, I could practically see the gears turning in her mind. "These are some clothes I thought you might like. If you want them, great, if not, that's perfectly okay, too." Her eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and uncertainty flashing across her face. I watched her expression closely, fearing I'd overstepped. To my relief, she took a small step forward, reaching out to touch the fabric. "Really? You'd part with these?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, and something about the vulnerability in her tone struck me. Here was someone who was beginning to peel back her own layers of insecurity, too. We spent a few moments going through the bag together. I noticed the way her nervous fingers grazed over the fabric, and I smiled when she found a favorite piece, an old cardigan I used to wear constantly. "This is really cute," she said, holding it up to her frame, and for the first time, I saw her smile genuinely, unfettered by her worries, and it felt like the sun breaking through clouds. Our conversation soon drifted to our shared experiences of battling our own reflections, and I could feel the barriers crumbling even further. She told me about her struggles with body image, and I found myself opening up about mine, an unexpected weightlifting as I articulated feelings I had kept bottled inside for years. But what surprised me most was the raw understanding that rippled between us, the way it felt like we were both navigating a path through the shadows of our past. When we parted that day, I had a flicker of hope in my chest, a small, glowing ember signaling that yes, maybe I hadn't messed things up completely with Jenna after all. Instead, perhaps we were finding something much stronger together, a connection that embraced our imperfections and uncertainties. A couple of weeks passed, and I noticed how our conversations deepened. Each friendly exchange, each shared laugh unfurled layers of kindness that illuminated our workdays. Eventually, I received a text from her late one evening, simple but profound. "Thank you for being so understanding, and for the close. Your kindness means more than you know." Reading those words, I felt a rush of warmth envelop me. This journey, still unfolding between us, had become something meaningful. Sometimes, I still catch myself reminiscing about Jenna and that moment in the break room, the moment that nudged me to embrace vulnerability and break down the walls we so often put up in our lives. Our paths intertwined beautifully, weaving a friendship rooted not just in shared experiences, but in the profound honesty of our journeys. I realized then that perhaps the greatest gift you can give someone isn't just your support, but also the chance to embrace their own story alongside yours. As for my closet, it remains a mixture of memories and reminders, each piece a testament to the bonds we form when we tread gently on the paths of others, opening ourselves to understanding and connection along the way. This newfound sense of understanding hung over me like a warm blanket, enriching my days at work. I felt lighter, not just from my physical transformation, but emotionally, too. Jenna and I launched into a friendship that surprised both of us. Lunchtime became a ritual of laughter and sharing secrets, the kind of bond that offers solace amidst the mundane. I even found myself looking forward to those small, fleeting moments, a shared joke, her eyes sparkling with mischief, or the way she'd roll her eyes but crack a smile when I made a goofy remark. That's what friendship can do. It nourishes you, fills the empty spaces in your heart that you didn't even know were there. But then came the day I noticed Jenna's mood shift. It was subtle at first, like a storm brewing in the distance. She would stare at her phone during lunch, her fingers curling and uncurling as if memorizing a dance routine she was suddenly unsure of. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach, that familiar twinge of empathy reminding me how little the surface can reveal. One afternoon, as we sat surrounded by the usual office chatter, I decided, no, I needed to broach the subject. "Hey, what's going on? You've been a little off lately." I tried to sound casual, but even I could hear the concern lacing my voice. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face like the shadow of clouds passing by. "It's nothing," she said, but her eyes told a different story. I sat still, not pressing but letting the silence wrap around us, allowing her to find her own words. She hesitated, glancing down at her untouched salad. "I applied for a promotion and didn't get it. I thought I had a good chance." The vulnerability in her voice pierced through layers of practiced indifference. I remembered what it felt like to crave validation in a world that often seemed indifferent, a feeling we shared despite our stark differences. "I'm really sorry to hear that," I said softly. "I know how hard you worked for it. Just know that your talent and hard work don't go unnoticed." A small smile tugged at her lips, grateful yet fragile. As we exchanged words, the truth seeped in. Rejection had its own sting, one that could echo far beyond the workplace. Without really planning it, I felt myself bridging the gap that fear had created. "You know, I still have those clothes I was telling you about. While they aren't a magic solution, I thought maybe you'd want to try them. They're just sitting there," I offered, hoping it wouldn't feel like pity. To my surprise, Jenna's brows furrowed, confusion coating her features. "You sure that's okay? I mean, they were yours." "Of course," I said, the conviction sweeping through me. "It would mean a lot to see them put to good use. Besides, they're like a little part of our journey here, right?" We stared at each other, a silent exchange deepening our connection even further. I saw her recognizing the hope within the gesture, the warmth of shared vulnerability transforming an old wound into something beautifully resonant. Later that week, I brought the clothes to her. When she opened the bag, eyes wide with surprise mingling with appreciation, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Each piece she tried on revealed not just fabric on skin, but also a layer of strength hidden beneath the seams of doubt. It was a miniature celebration, two friends standing tall in their stories, side by side. Jenna ended up wearing one of the old jackets the next week, my favorite one, paired with confidence that felt new yet familiar, a striking reflection of the growth we both were navigating. That day marked a turning point, not just in how we shared our journeys, but in understanding what it means to lean on each other, to give without losing a piece of yourself. Looking back now, reflecting on that chaotic but beautiful year with Jenna, I realize it's less about what we lose in life and more about what we find when we share. Each moment is a thread in the tapestry of relationships, connecting us in ways we can't always see. It has taught me that every experience, be it joyful or heartbreaking, carries the potential to interlace our lives in profound ways we can never fully understand. And as I gaze into my closet now, each piece still stands as a memory, a promise that there's always space for understanding and compassion, anchored firmly in the bond we chose to foster between us.